Good evening, everyone. This is Monday, June 1st, and this is the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. I like to call this meeting to order and ask that our clerk please call the roll, or clerk's representative.
Council members Brown.
Here.
Colebrook.
Here.
Percy.
Here.
Jacobson. Miller.
You're muted, Eric. Miller's here.
Roberts.
Here.
Wu. Here. Mayor Marlin.
Here.
Thank you. First up on our agenda tonight is approval of the minutes of our previous meeting from May 18th. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Motion by Bill, second by Bill. Were there any additions or corrections that anyone had to those minutes?
No.
Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Diane, I don't know if you want to make the announcement or if you would like me to about what we're going to do to conduct the meeting, but I know it was kind of in your comments you had planned to release, so I can say what's happening, or you can.
Go ahead. You're the chair. Go ahead.
So just to let the public know what's going on tonight, we are not going to be following into most of the city business that is on our agenda for this evening. In lieu of that, what we're going to do, which is coming up next, is take public input for the entirety of this meeting, and we will reconvene this meeting on Wednesday next week of 7 p.m. to go over the business that was scheduled on the agenda at that time. So we're gonna start off the night with an opportunity for the mayor and council persons to make statements of their own, and when those are finished, we're going to take public input. I will read through all of the emails that we have received from folks. Individual council members, if you guys are following along and you have something that was sent to you individually that you would like read, just let me know when I'm done going through the ones that were obviously sent to all of us. Wendy has got one or two that I didn't have that she's going to read as well. And so just watch if I miss any, try and help me keep track since there's a lot. After we're done reading through the emails we have received, we will allow folks to make public input directly through the meeting. If you're not familiar with how to do that in a Zoom meeting, there's a button at the bottom of your window that should say participants. If you click on that participants window, it should open up a list of names on the right. And in that, you should see an option to raise your hand. And as hands are raised and I see them pop up on my screen, I will call them out and you will be able to speak at that time. So just hang tight as we work through some of these other comments, and we'll get to everyone who wants to say something directly here. So I'll go ahead and start with the mayor, and then we'll move on to council members.
Thanks, Jason. And just to clarify, the reconvened meeting will be continued this week, which is June 3rd, Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And we'll begin on that day with the staff presentations that are on the agenda. The agenda won't change. It's just that we're only doing the public input part of our agenda tonight. So I wanted to start out by saying, again, this is a time of very deep hurt and anger, and I wanted to condemn in the strongest possible terms the cold-hearted murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Derek Chauvin, the officer, murdered him while his colleagues stood by and watched, and they should be charged accordingly as well. And this act had nothing to do with policing to protect and serve the community, and everything to do with the abuse of power. And I also wanted to acknowledge and celebrate the 17-year-old young woman for her bravery who stood her ground and filmed the horrific act. It was a tremendous act of bravery for her. So we have a lot of work to do in our country, in our community. Police Chief Bryant Serafin and I walked with hundreds and hundreds of other people today in a peaceful, and as Sharice Hersey wrote, purposeful protest this afternoon in Urbana. And I was struck by several people of color came up to the chief and thanked him for being there and for taking a knee in George Floyd's memory. And one woman said to him, I'm still afraid of the police, but I'm glad you're here. So I would like us to reach a point in Urbana when all our residents, especially our children, will be able to simply say, I'm glad you're here. So going closer to home, we are continuing to focus on the arrest of Aaliyah Lewis on April 10th in Urbana. I wanted to let you know where we are with progress on some things. We're close to finalizing selection of a consulting firm to conduct the independent review. The scope of the work will reflect all the questions and concerns that have been raised by the public and by the city council members. I went through the emails that we've received over the past 6 weeks. I also asked council members to send me the questions that they would like addressed. And these things fall into several major categories, and that's what we'll be sure to have the consultants focus on. This firm will also be doing direct stakeholder engagement, so it means they will be talking directly to members of the community. That's not been defined, how that all is going to work hasn't been defined yet, but that was an important part of selecting a firm who could do that. So they will be talking directly to people. I've also asked them to investigate specifically an allegation concerning police contact with the person who posted the video of a portion of the incident. That's a very serious allegation, and I want to get to the bottom of that. And then this firm also will be doing a direct report to city council. So council members will have an opportunity to ask questions directly with the firm. And I thought that was important too. But for me, one of the most important aspects was the ability to receive information and to communicate directly with the community members. And we should be able to have that information within the next couple of weeks. The community outreach coordinator position that was held by Preston James has been updated it's been approved by the Civil Service Commission, and we should be able to post it within the next week or so. So when it's done, I'll send council members a link and make sure it, take other steps to make sure it's circulated widely in the community. I intend to bring an appointment to fill the vacancy on the Civilian Police Review Board. That'll be brought to City Council next Monday, June 8th. And this is the vacancy that was created when Chair Grace Mitchell had to step down earlier this year. And once our city budget is passed later this month, we'll begin planning with the Champaign County NAACP, the Illinois NAACP State Conference, and the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police to host the workshop to explore the 10 shared principles for policing. And these principles are used to guide a productive relationship and understanding between law enforcement and the community. And then we'll have the goal of bringing those principles to City Council for affirmation. City of Champaign, Parkland College, the U of I Police have all passed these, have passed and affirmed these goals, and I expect that we will too, and then we will follow through in implementing. And finally, I just wanted to thank everyone who was at the protest today, and it was hundreds and hundreds of people in the streets of Urbana. Almost everyone was wearing a mask. And at one point I was standing next to 6 feet apart from Julie Pride, Public Health District Administrator, and she said, "Oh, everyone has a mask." And so that's, that's a compliment and a testament to the community spirit that we have here. And I really appreciate everyone for number one, coming, and number two, being considerate of other people in the community as well as your own health. Thank you. And I believe Chief Seraphin would like to say a couple of words too.
Chief, if you're here, we'll take your comments before we do council.
Thank you, Jared. As one might suspect, we've been rather busy over the last few days. I wanted tonight just to say a couple of words with regards to the recent events. And I actually jotted down a couple of paragraphs here, so I guess bear with me as I go through this. Having watched the video of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, I felt shock, anger, and sadness. Many police officers felt and feel this same way. This type of behavior must be condemned, cannot be tolerated. And it is not being tolerated. The authorities in Minnesota have made one arrest and are continuing their efforts to investigate. No one wants their chosen profession disgraced in this way. And I support those investigative efforts and charges. This afternoon, I participated, as the mayor said, in a march that started at the courthouse downtown here in Urbana. The event was peaceful, meaningful, and well executed in a safe and controlled manner. For that, I am grateful. Today, Champaign County showed the rest of the country how to ask for change. We at the Urbana Police Department are not perfect. And we understand that change is a process. We are striving to be better. We will continue to work through our partnerships to achieve more understanding and better outcomes. We want to treat all of our citizens with grace and respect as we move forward. Please know, citizens, that we hear you and we will continue to hear you. We want to be part of the solution. I just wanted to say those quick words tonight. Unfortunately, I hope you understand there's a couple other places I need to be. So I will politely step away at this time. But Jared, thank you for moving me up in the order. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Chief. I just want to stop council members 1 second. I'm getting a lot of emails, and you can probably see we filled up to 100 participants pretty quick. And Jason, do we have the ability to add more people to this meeting, or is that beyond what we're able to do at this time?
That's beyond what we're able to do at this time. What I would do if people can't get into the meeting, they're certainly encouraged to email citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us. And they can always still watch on our live stream, which I've shared on social media, but it's just livestream.com/Urbana, or on UPTV on Comcast, AT&T Uverse, or i3 broadband.
Okay. So what I will suggest to folks, if you are in the meeting observing, the live stream is available, and you do not plan to comment tonight, that you might pop off the meeting and watch us at the live streams that are available. I know that I've received at least 2 emails since we started of folks who intend to comment but are not able to because they cannot join the meeting. So please watch on the stream if you can, and reserve the spaces in the meeting for people who want to speak. We greatly appreciate it. And also, if you're talking to other folks who are trying to get in, tell them that, as folks make their comments, if they can drop out to go watch on the stream and see the rest of the comments, that might help some people get in as we go too. All right, so we're gonna move on to any comments or statements that council members wish to make. I haven't seen anybody raise hands, but just make your wishes known and I'll call on you. Eric, I see your hand is up.
Yes. So thank you for the opportunity. I don't usually talk about personal things in council meetings, but this is an occasion where I think I have to do that. I'm obviously white. Less obviously, I have 2 adopted Black children, who are now middle-aged, a man and a woman. We first had the idea of expanding our family in this way when we lived in a black neighborhood. It was actually in Shaker Heights, Ohio, but just a couple of blocks over the line from Cleveland. It was really an extension of a black neighborhood in east side of Cleveland. And we embedded ourselves in the social life of our neighborhood, and it was really great. And we had heard that there was a need for adoptive homes of African-American children. And we talked to our friends about it, and they thought it was a fine idea. So we did it. And that was in 1970. So I don't know truly what it's like to be an African-American man, but I know what it's like to be the father of an African-American man. And it is scary. The worst thing that happened to our son in Urbana was not at the hands of police, but at the hands of a young white man who attacked him with a baseball bat and assault with a deadly weapon, clearly, and was let off with nothing. A verbal rebuke, probation. This young man eventually wound up in state prison because he committed a number of other assaults, but the one on our son was not taken seriously. I'm sure because he was black and his assailant was white. This was a little over 30 years ago. You know that you can't protect your children from everything, but you shouldn't have to worry about this. The last time we experienced something really creepy and scary was just 3 years ago in a small town in western Kansas. We had the habit, we went every couple of years on a road trip to Colorado, and we caravanned in a couple of different cars, and we reserved rooms about halfway across, somewhere in western Kansas. And in 2017, we did this. And we got to the place where we had reserved rooms a little after midnight. And the man behind the desk looked at our son and said, "You look like a smoker. This is a non-smoking hotel." And when I've told this story sometimes to white friends, they said, "Well, that's illegal. You should call the police." I said, the last person I wanted to interact with was the police in that town at that time. And of course, this was something that our son had taught me. And we just got out of town as fast as we legally could and went on our way. It took me a long time. It took me until this morning to look at the video of the murder in Minnesota. And it was worse than I feared. It was so cold-blooded and intentional and cruel. It was worse than an act of sudden violence. And of course, I had to think, as every father of an African-American man would have to think, that could have been my son, or might someday be my son, if he happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and confront the wrong officer. So I've thought a lot about our local case that we've got much mail about. My feelings about that are not a secret. I've emailed them to a number of people. I will email them to anybody who asks. But I don't think this is the occasion to get into specifics about that, about things that we might or might not agree on. And I'm very, very glad that we're going to have an outside independent view. And I think after that will be a time to have a public conversation. I will say that I'm a bit of an outlier in my view about justice, and I hardly ever talk about this because I'm so far off at one end of the spectrum, but I'm a very strong believer in restorative as opposed to retributive justice. Now, there's no restoring the life of the man who was murdered in Minneapolis, but there's plenty of restorative principles to be brought to bear on what is happening here, and to use those principles not only to heal the divisions that have been exposed here, but to really build an even stronger community. And I hope, and if I were a religious person, I'd say I hope and I pray. And maybe sometimes I actually do pray, even if I'm not religious. But I fervently hope that this is going to be the outcome of the conversation that we have.
Eric, thank you. I saw Mary Alice, then Bill, then Dennis.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Diane, for allowing this meeting to be dedicated to hearing public input. I've written down a couple of my thoughts that I would like to read out to the public. Good evening. I want to add my voice in outrage regarding the horrific murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police. Sadly, this is not the first time we have watched an African-American die at the hands of police in our country. Peaceful protests have spread like wildfire across the United States, including here at our own community. Citizens are afraid of the very people who are supposed to protect them. The status quo cannot continue. I have listened to your comments at the council meetings. I've read all the community letters. I hear the concerns you raise. I have thought hard about what we can do as a community. I still have much to learn, and I appreciate all of the constructive comments and solutions community members have raised. The police have many laws, policies, procedures, contracts which govern their actions with the public. As a city council member, I want to work to shape those policies, procedures, and expectations of law enforcement so that they can better reflect the values of citizens of Urbana. Now more than ever, the city needs to work at rebuilding the trust in our community. I have seen other communities reevaluate their use of force policies to emphasize de-escalation. It is time for us to do so now. This is just one example of something that should be at the forefront of the conversation. From my perspective, and it sounds to me like many perspectives of the mayor and other council members, I feel that there are certain steps that we are taking and that we should continue to take. Number one, we've already asked for an independent review of the Aaliyah Lewis case, which I strongly support. We need to have a conversation at the city council level on how we can influence and help shape the police procedures. We need to create a concrete plan with community participation for a path to move forward as a community to ensure that the public has the trust of the police. And finally, we need to evaluate and retool the Civilian Police Review Board. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Alice. Bill, you were next, and then Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I don't have anything prepared. I do have a few thoughts I jotted down. I too am sickened by the really disgusting murder of George Floyd, and I really appreciative of the turnout today at the march and protest, and the words that were spoken, and the really all the thoughtful people that were there, really caring for the community and wanting change. I think we need to make sure not to lose the moment to make meaningful change and meaningful citizen oversight of the police force. I think we put in a lot of systems. Are you guys getting feedback? Okay.
Yes.
We put in a lot of systems to try to make things work. We have rigorous hiring policies, psychological testing, but do we follow up on that to see if it's successful for pre-hires? We have crisis intervention training, mental health first aid, how much follow-up and how much repeat training goes on in that direction to make sure that's effective. The council put in place residential preference points to try to get more police hires to be locally. How are we doing there? What's our African-American police population these days? There's a lot of things we haven't been following up on, and that's a failure, I think, of the council and of staff. And I think looking at the CPRB reports, yeah, there's definitely feedback. So I think the CPRB reform is primary on people's minds. So I asked for the reports a couple of weeks ago, or either reports or a discussion of the reporting process. We got a good outline today in our packet that we probably won't discuss tonight, but hopefully on Wednesday, be able to discuss what kind of reporting is supposed to be occurring. And I think it'll give us a chance to provide input into what we want to see in the annual report. And we don't want to just see how many cases there were, how many taser displays there were. I'd like to see what the CPRB has in mind as far as oversight, how things can be improved. That's all in the ordinance. It's in their charge, but they just haven't had the push or taken the initiative to work on that. I think a lot of that is probably needs some additional help from staff, maybe just maybe a push from council saying, you know, this is what we expect from you. I'd like to begin that discussion when we have that discussion. I think the de-escalation training we've talked about over the past 5 or 6 weeks, I think that's a important thing to emphasize, like Mary Alice was saying. We also have had a couple of good letters during this process from people who are involved in other programs that use de-escalation, whether it's you know, working with kids or in other situations that I think the police could benefit from similar types of training. I think also I realized I discovered during this process that Champaign has a citizen representative on the Internal Use of Force Review Committee. I think that would be a great thing to do. I didn't know that was possible. So seeing that Champaign has it makes me realize it's possible. I'm also really encouraged by the direction of the independent review and the outreach the mayor made to the city council and the deliberate effort she made to include a lot of questions in there and not to use a police agency like the state police or something like that. So that's all I have at this time. I look forward to hearing the public comments. I appreciate all the letters. I think last count before the meeting was about 60. So you can sit back and really appreciate the letters. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Dennis? Dennis, before you unmute yourself, I just want to make an announcement again to those who may have just joined. We have a limit, which is caused by Zoom, not by any desire of us to limit participation of 100 people in the meeting. If you're watching the meeting, there are other avenues from which one can watch this the stream of it without necessarily being in the Zoom meeting. Jason, can you remind folks what those are real quick?
Yeah, we're streaming this live, so they can always watch at livestream.com/Urbana. It's also live streamed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/UPTV6. And if they have Comcast, AT&T Uverse, or i3 broadband, it's available on there as well.
So I just want to encourage folks, if you do not plan to make a public comment at this meeting, to try and watch through one of those methods and leave space in the meeting for people who wish to do public comment. And just as a reminder, when council comments are over, for those of you who have your hands raised, we're going to read through emails received first, and then we will take everybody's individual comments in the meeting, just as a reminder. Sorry, Dennis, thanks for waiting.
No problem, really. First, I'd like to just say that I appreciate all the comments that have been shared so far by the other city council members and the mayor. And the many letters that I've received and we've all received concerning, expressing the concern of the community. I also attended the demonstration protest rally that started at the courthouse and marched to the city hall front on Vine Street. And I was very impressed by the number of individuals who appeared to express their interest. And I met Chief Seraphin and the mayor and many other community members and leaders who gathered there and were participating. It's quite, I think Urbana has a good sense of its community and is one of the more progressive thinking communities. And I think that the fact that this demonstration was orderly and peaceful says a lot for the community. It's not good to hear about violence and disruption when you are trying to achieve the goals that you are expressing. But I understand there's a lot of anger in the community and other places in the United States. When we first had a discussion before the City Council on May 4th about this incident, I did write the mayor and I offered 6 ideas that I thought should be pursued. And quite a few of them are actually being taken up, which I appreciate. I did suggest that it might be wise to place the officers who are involved on administrative leave while this event is going on, not prejudicially thinking that they are guilty, but just because it clears the air for more of a measured assessment, and they're not under scrutiny as they're serving in their department, if that's taking place. And so far we haven't discussed that, or we haven't seen that happen, but I thought that was a useful tool to separate the activity of the individual officers while we are kind of trying to find a good assessment of what's happening. Second, I agreed that there should be an independent review, and I did offer 4 possible suggestions to the mayor of where an independent review could take place, from what organization. It's true that 3 of them were from various Academy of Polices in the state other than our own local academy. And one of them was to contact the Illinois Municipal League for guidance on finding an independent reviewer. The third thing was that I discussed the value of a public forum. And I would say that if we hold a public forum, and I think it would be useful to explore the community's interests in finding new paths to assess police activity and practice, and to understand it perhaps more thoroughly, that would be a useful thing to do in the community. And I also wanted to express support for the reactivation and maybe further involvement of the Community Police Review Board. It would probably be within their mission to hold such an educational forum in the community. And I would support them to also promote fairness and unbiased interactions between the police officers and the public. And, finally, I did recommend to the mayors 7 questions that I thought would be of use to send to the mayor and to the independent review individual who's going to come and explore what the activities of the officers have been. So I gave 7 specific questions about policy in our department. So going forward, I have, I think, some optimism. I think the community is expecting a good positive result from this and some interaction. They've provided a lot of suggestions via their email. And I think that they should know that we hear this, we're taking it seriously. This is not something we're going to blush over just because, we protect the brotherhood of the police. I think we respect our police, but of course we expect them also to do the very best that they can during any kind of interaction with the community. So a review of nonviolent interaction policy is, of course, probably what's uppermost on most people's mind. So I just respect this possibility. I know we're going to hear a lot of comments tonight, and I think if the community will bear with us, I think that we'll do the best we can to actually answer and satisfy a lot of the questions that have come up. So that's my thoughts tonight.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. Charisse?
Hi, and I didn't necessarily prepare anything tonight either. But I did want to comment regarding the unfortunate and awful and brutal murders. Actually, George Floyd was one, Breonna Taylor's another, Ahmaud Arbery was another, in such a short amount of time. But this is not something that is new within the Black community. When Du Bois was over the NAACP, he used to hang a flag out that would say, a man was lynched yesterday, or put a number of how many had been lynched. And somehow we're in the 21st century and this is still happening. We're not hanging from a tree now, but we are still hanging. And I would like to thank the mayor and everyone in the community that has, I'd like to thank the mayor for forward thinking about how this may affect our community. I'd like to thank everyone in the community for the patience and the strength. It takes a lot more strength to hold your peace and to be peaceful when you're angry than it does for you to be enraged. And for the people in the community that just today being in that, and I've been in marches before and stuff, and this was peaceful, it was decent, and it was in order, as I would prefer everything to be that I would be involved in. And it takes a lot more strength to keep that than it does for a person to be angry and say angry things and to foment chaos. And I can only say I've talked to the chief of police regarding what my ideas are going forward, and my discussion with him that I just have on a one-to-one basis is how we can actually have the police officers, maybe there could be some bias training. That's one of the first things that we talked about, is how everyone needs to be more cognitive of the biases that they may have going in. And let's not anyone say, oh, I don't have any bias, I'm a flower child. We all do. All of us do. One way or the other. I would like, I had a discussion with another council member about the CIT, the what's it called, Jared? The CIT training, the crisis intervention training.
Mhm.
that maybe that's something that all of the police should have, and maybe that would actually be helpful in the event, in any event that there might be some type of conflict, possible conflict. But mostly what I wanted to say tonight is just that I am proud of the city of Urbana. I am proud for how we managed to handle the crises that have been just sweeping over the nation lately, and how empathetic and compassionate we tried, at least put the attempt to be, for the citizens in the city of Urbana. And I want us to continue to do that and to be thoughtful going forward of how we can improve ourselves, not just as a city government or as members of the city government, but as a community at large. So thank you.
Thanks, Sharice. I want to just take a moment and apologize to the public that we're getting some Zoom bombing incidents here. Jason is doing his best to try and remove these folks, but obviously our meeting has caught the attention of some people who want to do no good in our world and are attempting to disrupt our meeting as much as possible. We're going to try and keep moving forward through this. We acknowledge that the language being used is amongst the most hurtful and worst language anyone in our country can use against another person. And, you know, we see it happening and we apologize. We're trying to do our best to remove these folks as quickly as possible. Before I go into my comments, Bill, did you want to, I didn't see you raise your hand. Colebrook, did you want to say anything this evening?
Yeah, I was just about ready to raise my hand, so thank you for addressing me. I've provided. I'll pause here for a second. I've provided more extensive comments in previous meetings. I too don't like to talk about my personal life or my professional life, but I think it takes a greater context in this discussion. I'm proud to be an active law enforcement officer. I've been in the business for 34 years. I'm a chief of police at Parkland College, and I'm proud of that. I can assure you that good cops are sickened by the actions of the officer in Minnesota. He violated his oath and he violated his badge, and he needs to be held accountable. I'm actually joining from work. I've been here since yesterday afternoon. My job as a supervisor and administrator is to supervise my officers who have been out in the community, responding to calls for service with all the other area law enforcement agencies up in the North Prospect, North Neal area, other places in Champaign-Urbana, working alongside all of our partner agencies, including Urbana PD, U of I PD, the County Sheriff's Department, obviously Champaign PD, State Police, responding to calls for service to help make this city
Hold on just a minute, and I will, I've unmuted Jared here, and let me find you, Bill, and you can continue. I've muted everybody else now, but Jared and Bill, Bill, you still have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. My comments are about ready to conclude. Anyway, I was just saying that we were responding to incidents, call for service, and help make the community safe. And I too, as a police executive, look forward to a review process because the entire intent of a review process is to make sure that regardless of what position we start in, we always want to make ourselves better. So I'm looking forward to the process, and I thank you for allowing me to make these comments.
Thanks, Bill. So I guess I am last up, but in accordance with our meeting rules, I'd like to ask Mary Alice Wu to take the chair while I make my comments.
All right, Jared, I'm happy to take the chair. Would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mary Alice. So I've thought a lot about what's going on, what I was going to say tonight. I want to thank everybody on the council and the mayor for the comments we've made this evening. I know I'm getting flack for not having been able to stop what was just happening with the Zoom bombing, and I apologize for that. I think we're going to have to take a serious consideration if we are on trolling radar to password protect our meetings or do whatever we need to do to keep the trolls out. We'll definitely be considering serious action about that, because it's absolutely unacceptable to allow that to be going on, and I apologize that it's happened at all this evening. But anyway, to get back to what I wanted to talk about. You know, I think that a lot of folks who are listening to us tonight, and a lot of folks who are sending emails, aren't necessarily interested in a lot of our personal experiences and our personal stories. I think that most people are really just concerned about what we're going to do as a council, as a public body, as elected officials, about what's happening going forward. And even in light of trying to answer that question, I think that it's important that I need to do something that I feel like a lot of white folks in our country need to do, and that's to call ourselves out in this time. There was something that I learned about my family late last year, and if you and your family have been around in this country for as long as mine has, we have ties to the sons and daughters of the revolution, as people often like to proudly proclaim. And if your family's been around then, and not even as long as then, if you do any research into your family history, you'll probably end up having to face a disgusting and ugly fact about your ancestors, and that's that your ancestors probably owned slaves. I found out earlier, like I said last fall, that there are clear records that my ancestors owned slaves, and that you know, I really feel like if there is ever going to be healing, if there's ever going to be a way for us to move forward in this country, this is something that each of us as white Americans is going to have to face and look at the ugly truth of. And, you know, I cannot even hardly express how shameful I feel knowing that, and how shameful I feel knowing that it was somebody I'm related to directly. A lot of people I was related to directly. And it's probably a truth about a lot of us, most of us, all of us. And, you know, we have to we have to face it. You know, and I'm saying it, and I'm bringing it up because I want people to know that I understand what that means for how things have come from generation to generation to generation to generation, you know, 10 times over to me, and who I am, and where I'm at in my life, and how I sculpt my views of this world. And I know that my mind was poisoned through the things that have come down from that past and that history. And it is poisoned today. You know, I'm not, I have a lot of allyship in progressive movements. And, you know, I try to do the best that I can to be a voice for people who don't have the position that I have, who don't have the privilege that I have, who don't have the place that I have in life. And I try and have come a long way in learning about that, but that doesn't mean that I don't still have those parts in who I am. You know, I have shamefully othered my Black brothers and sisters. You know, I have felt afraid of Black strangers who I did not know. And I have looked at groups of Black people, especially young Black men, and been suspicious of them. Even in my recent life, even in my recent experience, I've done this. And I hear myself do it, and I'm able to stop it and say, you have no reason to think that about those people. You don't know them. You don't. Why would you do that? And I've learned to try and stop that voice. But I would be lying if I didn't say that it was not there, because it is. And even as a person who I am, who fights for these things, I have that. Sorry. And I feel like, you know, there's no way that we, as white Americans, without accepting this truth about ourselves and bringing it into our hearts to really understand what it means, are ever going to be able to heal what has been done in this country. 400 years of this trauma that we have inflicted on Black Americans, you know, and we're still dealing with it today. Still dealing with it today. You know, I just think that people, we need to talk about it. We need to be real about it with one another, to acknowledge that this poison exists in our minds. And a bunch of you heard it here tonight with people saying the N-word in our meeting just because they've got nothing better to do in life than to do something that damages another person. It is a disease of our minds. It is a disease of our souls. And it has been here since this country was started. And if we do not say it, if we do not call it out, we will not be able to move forward. There's nothing that we can do if we don't start there. So I wanted to say that because I want people to know that we, as white Americans, especially those of us in positions of leadership, have to do this work, this hard work, to make other white Americans understand what this is, and that this poison is in us, and that we have to get rid of it. You know, there's a lot of things that people can say, but I can definitely say that it is not the responsibility of Black Americans to fix the problems that we white Americans have created in this country. It is our responsibility. And that's a lot of hard things to say because, you know, what I want to ask the council and the mayor and the city staff and the Urbana Police Department is not going to be an easy thing to do. And I don't know how realistic, you know, how we go forward becomes a reality if we can't start there together and use that to understand how we have to change what is going on with police departments around this country. You know, I think it is 100% clear that, to me, that the status quo of how police exist today cannot continue. You know, I am not interested in seeing reform. I think it's evident that reform has failed our black and brown brothers and sisters. You know, 6 years ago, we were in this situation with Mike Brown and Eric Garner, and, you know, President Obama was in office, and he implemented a program called the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice, which was a, you know, I think it was 250 something, I don't know. There were millions and millions and millions of dollars that were put into this that were made available to police departments all over the country. Ours included, benefited from this, and still I believe we used a grant from that program to purchase our body cameras not that long ago. But, you know, look at one in particular example of a community that used that program, and that is in Minneapolis. They received tons of money about this and invested in body cameras and invested in the implicit bias training and the community policing training and the de-escalation techniques, you know, 5 years ago. And none of that stopped Derek Chauvin from kneeling in broad daylight with a camera in his face on George Floyd's throat until his life had been choked out of his body in 2020. Not only that, but 3 fellow officers were right there and did nothing to save that man's life. And they have had all of these programs. To me, that says, you know, we have to fundamentally change how police departments operate, how they are overseen, and how they execute the job that they have been given to do in our community. To me, that means that our community needs to be directly involved in setting the budget for our police department. The community needs to be directly involved in the adoption of policy and procedure of the police department. They need to be directly involved in approving our union contracts and be given true and real power to decide and enforce disciplinary action on police. You know, ultimately what this meeting means is that as soon as it is within the city's power, I believe that we should call a special meeting, as many have called for, to discuss exactly what I'm talking about. To receive presentations from public, to talk to the public about what we're really going to do about this, what we're really going to do about getting this change to move forward. And I understand that the city is in a very difficult position right now due to the COVID pandemic. And, you know, it's not going to be something we're able to do quickly, but I'm committed to seeing it through, and I hope that other council members and folks will be along to make sure that we do something that means something real, and we don't just gloss over the surface of these deep-seated issues. And, you know, I'm sorry for the emotion. I'm sorry that was a lot, and I've taken up enough time. But I want to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to listen to me. I greatly appreciate it. I'm getting we're having a big problem with folks doing these things in, so I think we're gonna adjourn this meeting. Or not adjourn, but we're gonna continue the meeting until next Wednesday. I apologize that this keeps happening, but I don't think we can continue with all the Zoom bombing that we're getting happening tonight. So, oh, Mary Alice, I see you waving your hand. I'm sorry.
Unmute. I was muted and I couldn't say anything. So Jared, I have the chair right now.
Oh, yes, you do. I'm sorry.
Would you like the chair back?
Sure.
Okay. All right. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mary Alice. I guess I'd like to get a quick consensus from council if we should withhold the meeting. I'm getting lots of emails with people saying we should stop because of the Zoom bombing that's happening. Yes, Diane.
I'm concerned that unless I'm not sure we have a way to stop the Zoom bombing. And I'm very concerned about, number one, not giving people an opportunity to speak. And number two, on Wednesday, we have a very, very full agenda that we have to get through of business.
I understand. I'm just, people are, I'm getting a lot of emails about it.
I understand that. Just to weigh in from a technical standpoint, just because you if you were to reconvene the meeting on Wednesday, there's no guarantee this exact same thing won't happen on Wednesday.
Okay.
From a technical standpoint, what I might suggest as staff is that you continue the meeting, and we'll do the best that we can to limit the inappropriate actions. Only because I don't think there's a guarantee that we can necessarily limit this on Wednesday or whenever else we would reconvene the meeting.
Okay.
And I really hope we can find a platform that's more suited to public meetings. I don't think Zoom was ever really designed for the kind of meetings that we do, in government. And anyone out there who wants to invent something like that, I think you'd make a fortune at this point. But.
Okay, Mary Alice.
I just wanted to say that I think Jason has forcibly muted everybody. So I would like to suggest that we continue unless we get another disruption within the meeting to ensure that the muting is actually serving the function of preventing Zoom bombers.
Okay. I think we're not getting any audio ones anymore. I had my screen down while I was speaking, so I didn't see, but the last video one that had been popping up, because when people join, their video automatically pops up. So it's kind of hard to stop those from appearing. But I just want people to know I'm getting emails as we're talking right now. So I'm watching, and it sounds like everybody wants to continue with the meeting. So I think we will do so. Charisse, I see you with your hand. Oh, sorry.
All I want to say is that I think we should continue with the meeting. I think whoever's doing that, this is exactly what they want us to do, is to stop the meeting because they're sickos. But so, no, I want to continue the meeting. I want to get through it. I want to hear what people have to say. And I think that there's somebody out there who doesn't want us to hear what people have to say. So
Okay, and I just want, I don't know if everyone has seen this, but I am, Rachel Storm is messaging me on Facebook right now telling me that they were seeing someone masturbating. Uh, I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but apparently that was what was going on, that somebody was exposing themselves and masturbating via video.
yeah,
I'm sorry. What I might suggest is if you go up to the upper right-hand corner and click on speaker view, you will then only see the person who is speaking. And since I've muted everyone and only Jared and I and the mayor have the ability to unmute people, that should take care of any inappropriate video. Again, participants can go up to the top right-hand corner and click speaker view, and then they will only see the person who is speaking at that time.
And Jason, there isn't an option in our settings to automatically mute and turn off video when people join.
There is an option, and it is on to mute it when people join, but there's not an option, unfortunately, to keep it off. If there was, trust me, it would be on.
Okay. I just had a suggestion via email about doing that. Okay.
And I guess I'll clarify. There's not an option that I'm aware of, and when we looked into this, there wasn't an option previous. Certainly something that we can look for in the future.
Yeah, and I just saw it happen again. Somebody was just showing his ass and his penis to us. So
again, just the upper right-hand corner and click speaker view.
Okay, well, I don't know how we're going to edit that out of our recorded meeting, but hopefully that will not be a part of it. I really want to apologize to everyone that this is happening. I don't know how they got a hold of our meeting, but it sounds like the consensus is here. The people are here, and I'm also seeing a lot of calls that we should hold it anyway. So we're going to do our best to deal with it. Let's continue on. The next thing we were going to do was read comments that we received via email before we took participant comments, which will obviously have to be another one. I'd also encourage folks that you can email citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us if you would like to submit your comment there, and it will be read into the record. I've gotten quite a few since we organized some of them for tonight, so please, we're going to try and get everybody in as quickly as we can. I'm trying to do my best to handle all of what's coming in. All right, so as I had mentioned before, I'm just starting in order of which they were received. I think that that for me means that we start with Jane McClintock, who was responding to a conversation she had with City Administrator Carol Mitten. She said, "Hi, Ms. Mitten. It was a pleasure to chat with you briefly a bit ago. Thanks for taking the time to consider my concern. I've attached the letter I'm referring to as your reference," and she attaches a letter that mentioned why the city was not able to process her complaint under the CPRB ordinance. She said, "It is absolutely critical that we interpret or change the CPRB ordinance in a way that is fair and can actually provide some level of oversight of police actions in Urbana. As I'm sure you are aware, our CPRB has seen a paltry number of complaints that have been submitted, and further, very few complaints are submitted in the first place due to the onerous nature of the process. My complaint is rejected on the grounds that I was not physically present at the site of the incident. The ordinance reads, complaints shall be based upon a first-hand account either by a person involved in the incident or a witness to the account. I argue that I witnessed the incident with my own eyes, in my own body, firsthand via video. We all have. If this interpretation is unjustified in your eyes, we must change the ordinance. It is far too restrictive and indeed ridiculous to have a civilian review board when it is so restricted as to what they are able to review. Are only the victims of police brutality able to file a complaint? It seems a lot to ask of them when they are traumatized and terrorized by the police. look forward to the council's discussion of CPRB on Monday and speaking with you further about this matter. And just to remind the public that we are not going to discuss that. We will be discussing the CPRB on Wednesday of this week at 7 p.m. All right, next I have Kate Ross. Urbana City Council members, over the past few decades, we have seen police act with violence, even when filmed, because they believe they will not be held accountable for their actions. This needs to change. I ask that Urbana makes restitutions for the most recent act of police brutality and drop charges on Alea Lewis. There should be an independent investigation during which the officers involved should be placed on leave. In addition, the Civilian Police Review Board should be empowered to have true, meaningful oversight of the police department. Thank you. Next, I have Megan Brunning. This was sent to me directly. I am a Urbana resident, and I'm writing in support of de-escalating training for all police officers. I believe this is important training for officers in every community. She said she came across an article about that topic in the News Gazette and linked it. It seems the NAACP has a program that would be beneficial to our city's team, and I believe she's referring to the 10 shared principles. She said, I am concerned for people of color and disturbed by the arrest of Alea Lewis, but de-escalation training is necessary for the protection of all citizens. People with mental illness or social difficulties need officers to be trained in this way. Anyone is likely to be under psychological distress if police are involved in a situation, and it is the responsibility of the police to keep cool heads and de-escalate situations. All right, next we have Amy Hatch, and she says, hold on. For 2 months, I heard nothing about this violent altercation that appalls me almost as much as the incident itself. According to many, the incident is only a graphically well-documented glimpse into an all too familiar pattern. My own research cannot disprove this. That is incredibly disappointing and disheartening to me in this day and age, in a university town especially. From my own research, I also believe the initial reactions from the city pointed mostly to well-worn justifications related to gun violence and the need for behavior change among young people. Behavior change and reasonable gun legislation is a start, and also it's past time to stop treating people of color by a different set of rules once and for all. In perpetually doing this, whites create the very problem of violence that we are facing. We are literally stirring the pot ourselves into a boiling rage. Why do that? What is the reasonable response to facing such unjust disparities and discrimination for generations? It must end. My greatest fear as a white person who will soon be in the minority is that I'll be judged by the color of my skin because of the racial injustices that other whites chose not to do better sooner. I add my voice to the growing call for deeper analysis and structural change. I expect the coming months to be a transformative time for justice in Champaign County, and I'm paying closer attention now to what our public servants are doing. It's 2020, and this sort of behavior, as well as racism, is unacceptable, period. As public servants, I beseech you to seek justice and serve your public well, all of them, please. Thank you for your time. And next I have Anna Asplund. Said, I'm writing to ask the following. Immediately drop the charges against Alea Lewis. Put the officers who perpetrated unnecessary violence in our community on leave until a thorough and independent investigation can be completed. Stop the Urbana Police Department from blatantly violating city code in regards to the Citizen Police Review Board, and institute more oversight to ensure that community members have a meaningful say in how their community is policed. Start holding UPD Chief Bryant Serafin accountable for complaint response timelines as dictated by city code. Adopt the NAACP and an Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police 10 shared principles. In keeping our community safe, our police officer should be held to city rules, codes, and regulations at a minimum, and preferably should be held to an even higher standard. The unnecessary violence and pattern of blatant disregard for regulations by UPD lead to distrust and fear. If I, as a white woman, feel this uncomfortable and unsafe with the UPD, I can only imagine how unsafe our Black community members must feel. I urge you to make these changes immediately so we can make a safer and more trusting community. All right, next I have Angela Warala. Apologize if I said that wrong. I'm emailing as an Urbana citizen to demand change right now in local police policy in the Citizen Police Review Board. I initially watched the video of Leah Lewis being attacked by police, as I have in the past when a video shared showing yet another cop harassing, attacking, brutalizing, and killing a black person. I don't know if watching it is the right thing to do. It feels exploitive. And I also feel it's my responsibility if the person had to endure the abuse as a white person, I should not just witness it, but use my anger not to just pontificate on social media, but to act. For me, it starts with the way I parent my kids. The other day, I witnessed my ignorance and privilege in the most profound way. As I walked with my 7-year-old in our neighborhood, a cop driving by waved at us, smiling in a friendly, reassuring way. I realized just then, if I were black, that cop may have treated us different. I don't know what it's like to feel fear when I see the police. After the cop passed, my daughter said the police are nice. And my heart sank because I realized I have not done enough to teach her. She knows the black people are not treated fairly and that her friends deserve better. But she has blind spots. My job is to show her and teach her to open her heart so she sees injustice and shows up for her friends. She might be 7, but this is when I must start to teach my kids about being a true ally and standing up for what's right. My daughter doesn't fear the police, but I know kids her age with black skin have already learned to. I have to do better. So I told her not all cops are nice, and some of them treat black people and other people of color badly, sometimes even hurting them badly. I said some cops are often nicer to white people, and black people are often punished more because they are black. I know there's more and better ways to teach her and more ways to explain this all to her. I had to start somewhere. I will keep trying. This is not to show proof of my action, but to show how good intentions aren't good enough. And I have to do more so my kids understand their privilege and don't cause harm to black people. It's a lot to put on a 7-year-old, but black kids bear that weight every day. We have to learn to take that weight on, to support and defend them. We can and must do better. Otherwise, we are complicit in the problem. I don't know if the way I handled it was right. I truly don't. I want to believe it can change and that black kids can walk down the street one day and not be afraid of the cops. I want people like Leah Lewis to trust when she turns to the cops for help that she doesn't risk her safety to do so. So I watched the video and was saddened, angered, and sick. But as a white person, it's not enough. I must demand better for my fellow human beings of color. So I demand the following. All charges against Leah Lewis must be dropped, a true, meaningful, and independent investigation for officers who beat Miss Lewis to be put on leave pending the investigation, and for reform to make the Civilian Police Review Board a meaningful oversight and compliance with its ordinance. Hold on just one second. All right, up next I have Kai Shinbro. Actions over the past week ignited by the killing of George Floyd have been harrowing for all of us. Undoubtedly, the council is reckoning with what this means for our peaceful, seemingly isolated Midwestern city. What does this mean for us? What can our city do to prevent social unrest here? These are questions we should all ask ourselves. To aid in that conversation, I have a few proposals that I would like to read aloud, and if time permits, I'd like to hear responses from council members. 1, institute a mandatory yearly anti-oppression training for all active members of the Urbana Police Force. This is, I believe, the least we can do in response to the national outcry against racialized police violence in this country, which our city is not immune to. See, for example, the April 10th tasing of a woman already in Urbana police custody. We can argue about individual cases, whether they were affected by racial issues or not, but the bottom line is that people in our community want a more socially educated police force, and this is one step towards that direction. 2, reduce the militarization of our police force, put a freeze on any new purchase or acquisition of police weaponry, shielding vehicles, etc., and publicize it. There are no plans to this effect anyway. Great, publicize it. This will show our community that our police force is not in the business of oppressing its citizens and acquiring unnecessary tools of police violence. 3, make a formal statement on behalf of the city council condemning the killing of George Floyd and police violence everywhere. So let our community know that the city council stands with us and that you acknowledge that sometimes structures of policing can be broken and that we will work together to fix them whenever necessary. In short, stand on the right side of history. All right. Next, I have Steve Momoli. On reading about the Alea Lewis case, it is obvious that there are needs for police reform, saying the police did nothing against the law when citizens are outraged at how they should treat people. There is a need for change. Police are the ones who are supposed to be trained to help us de-escalate situations. We shouldn't have to have full classes on how to interact with public servants. A truly meaningful and independent investigation is needed in these situations. Thank you for your time. Next, I have Melissa Baber. I'm sure that none of you on the City Council are surprised at the unrest that is taking place around this country and here in Champaign-Urbana. In order to ensure the safety of our communities, primarily people of color, action needs to be taken and reform needs to take place. The first and primary thing I think needs to happen is that government as a whole, but also individual city governments, need to A, come to terms with and admit publicly that there is a problem. There has been a problem for a long time, and the last week has brought these issues to the front of everyone's attention. And B, create a plan for change that gives the Black community a voice for deciding that change. I personally have ideas of my own. The police in this country are a public service. They serve and work for the public as a whole. Therefore, they should be monitored by the public. There's no good system in place at this time for our police force to be monitored externally. I think that all police personnel should be outfitted with body cameras, and that the footage from these body cameras should be available to the public in some form to survey. I am confident that we can create positive reform in this country that will act to keep everyone safe. Next, I have Megan McDonald. I'm writing to you again to say that the steps proposed for our community are not enough in terms of police brutality acknowledgement, community education, etc. If it were not for the community, this would not even be a discussion, and that is troubling in itself. And the face that civilians are educating you all about trauma-informed practices rather than vice versa. How can we trust our police force after reading they allegedly wanted that video taken down off Facebook? How can you watch that video and decide you are proud of their professionalism? There was nothing professional about the way those officers handled that situation. From approaching her from behind, grabbing her arm, punching her, kneeing her, verbally harassing and demeaning her, tasing her without warning in custody twice, recording her without her consent the next day while interviewing her, and then trying to present that as a fact at the city council meeting. A 21-year-old woman, a 21-year-old Black woman. As a 26-year-old white woman who has lived in this town for almost a decade, I can tell you I'm 100% certain this would never happen to me. In the wake of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd's deaths, I urge you to see how this is not an isolated incident in Champaign-Urbana or in our nation. The incident of sitting on Miss Lewis' back could have easily ended in her death. Would her death have been enough for you all to see how wrong this was? It shouldn't take that. De-escalation is possible. So is propaganda to upkeep the status quo. We are sick of this being the status quo. We are sick of being lied to and gaslighted about something we can see with our own eyes. Why did they react to this like an active shooter situation with assault rifles? As Tracy mentioned at the May 11th meeting, the 911 call that was made mentioned a young man accidentally shooting himself. That's what the caller said. That's the first thing the 911 caller said. It's a boy that had shot himself. The way the police phrased it, shots fired, an armed subject, and possibly an injured subject, purposeful, dehumanizing, not framed in a way of serving and protecting, but in a way of validating their militarized tactics to the public and you. The way they ended the 911 call, I appreciate it. No information given to the caller about needing to go inside, stay safe, never asked if the subject looked to be hurt, bleeding, or limping. A young black man that had supposedly shot himself. He fell into the street, was now up walking, and probably wasn't okay, physically or mentally. The one with him probably traumatized, reeling as well. Now bring in the police, who we know across the nation disproportionately kill Black people over any other race. Out of every 5 deaths by the police, 4 out of 5 are Black men. Think these 2 young Black people don't know and feel that every day of their life? It is already a tense situation that the police did nothing but escalate. Tell me why young civilians need to be completely calm in moments of high stress, potentially life and death situations, but the police can act on whatever impulse and justify it with the law on their side. While Miss Lewis was being punched, she yells out, "I hope you have your body camera on." And thankfully they did. What a world to have someone 3 times your size sitting on you, and you have internalized how often and how easily this could lead to another death by the police. She yells out her name, asks for confirmation that the body cameras are on, all because she knows the threat they pose to her and those that look like her. I went to the protest on Saturday in downtown Champaign. I saw a young girl barely older than 13 crying because she was afraid. Another young woman, maybe 22, was crying because she's tired of having to march so many times in her young life. An existential tired that most of us here cannot relate to. But we can stand up and demand that Officer Russ be fired. The officers that have withheld information about Ms. Lewis being tased be fired or under review. Whoever wrote that press release needs to issue an apology. There is no world where an unarmed suspect needs to be punched in the throat or kneed in the ribs. We have seen the results of what happens when police think they can sit, knee on a black person's back with impunity. I do not want to see Urbana become more militarized and have this behavior become normalized. Arrest the cops involved with this incident. At the very least, fire them. Drop the charges against Ms. Lewis. Come out with an apology statement for Ms. Lewis from the UPD and City Council. Have the workshops that you want, but know that is not enough. Make the police listen to the community, not the other way around. Nothing less will suffice. P.S. If the officer in question wants to explain what he meant by "you need to act like a lady," I would greatly appreciate it. I'm sure his sexism had plenty to do along with his racism. All right, next is Sharon Irish. Dear Mayor, City Council members, Civilian Police Review Board, and the Human Relations Office. First, I hope you're healthy, or as healthy as possible during these very difficult times. I appreciate the hard work you do, and this message is not intended to drag you down, but rather to offer up some possibilities that I would like to work with you to address. I believe we have an opportunity now to approach challenges of safety and well-being in Urbana, at least in alternate ways. I don't imagine changes will come easily or quickly, and I know that some of you have been working towards increasing justice for all for many years. I'm most grateful for that. Fear and distrust, my own included, make these conversations very difficult. Improving police practices is a step that I imagine has support among you, including working with the organizations like the ACLU to increase police training and de-escalation and monitoring the effectiveness of that training. But along with many others, I am questioning reform versus abolition of the police. I have been going to protest about police militarization, abuse, and violence since the late 1960s. As Dylan Rodriguez noted in 2017, it isn't police brutality, it is policing that is the issue. I have attached a PDF from the group Critical Resistance and a short video from the leader, there's a link there, of Critical Resistance, both of which I have found helpful in thinking about different directions for community safety. I agree with most of the recommendations, not all, but given careful thought that CR has given to these issues, I think the materials are a great starting point for discussion. Thank you for your consideration. All right, next I have Mark Becker. Hello, thanks to the diligent work of many community and civic leaders, the Civilian Police Review Board has endeavored to provide a structure of accountability to support transparent relations between the community and the local police since 2007. Since that time, however, the review board's effectiveness has been limited by a noticeable lack of investigative and disciplinary powers in relation to civilian complaints against the police. Additionally, it is noteworthy that the ability for civilians to access this resource has been significantly hampered due to notary requirements. As a result of recent incidents of negative interactions between police and the community, i.e. the beating of a young Black woman on Good Friday of this year, as well as the growing nationwide push for increased accountability and trust building between the police and the communities which they are supposed to be serving, the importance of supporting the work of the CPRB is more urgent than ever. We have the opportunity to take concrete steps in building the trust and accountability that is absolutely necessary. If we are to have any hope of justice and peace in our community, I urge you to empower the CPRB with greater investigative and disciplinary powers, as was the original intent, and remove the arbitrary barriers to the complaint filing process. Do not miss this is your opportunity to signal your willingness to support these needed institutional reforms. The community needs your help now. Do not let us down. All right. Next, I have Emily Blevins. What heavy times we are living in. Since I last wrote to the council about the Alea Lewis case, the country has entered into an all too familiar stage of grief and outrage regarding violence committed by police against Black Americans and Indigenous and minority communities. While our community mourns Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, we have the opportunity to look inward to identify the processes in our community that could lead to the same results. The Alea Lewis case is but one example of how police across the country have a pattern of disrespecting Black Americans' rights. Rights such as presumption of innocence, right to know one's charges, and ultimately the right to their own bodies and to life itself. I'm writing in support of the following requests pertaining to the Alea Lewis case and the Civilian Police Review Board. I ask, one, that the third-party investigation of the Good Friday violence and arrest of Alea Lewis not be done by state police in the interest of true accountability, total transparency, and maintaining trust with the community. Two, that the charges against Alea Lewis be dropped due to the police use of excessive force and their lack of de-escalation tactics. Three, that the officers who assaulted Ms. Lewis be put on leave pending the investigations. And finally, four, that the Civilian Police Review Board be reformed to provide meaningful oversight of use of force by officers, including complying with its ordinance to review all developments or all deployments of tasers against civilians. In the current times, we must remember that complacency in the face of injustice only fuels anger, and we must renew our commitment to showing up when our community members voice legitimate demands. Sorry. It may be inconvenient or politically unpopular for some to prioritize the community's grievances over the status quo, which is favored by those in power. However, this is the way forward. We cannot be apathetic. We cannot see community members' grievances as nuisances. These are gifts, bringing our grievances to our leaders with faith that they will listen and will act, are gifts that allow local officials to address needs with minimal disruption. In order to maintain faith in the process of local government, the people must see results in a good faith effort on behalf of our elected officials to address our grievances. I urge us not to be complacent and instead to demonstrate an urgency for rectifying the unjust structures of our society. Next, I have Paul Kaiser. With recent local headlines over Urbana police brutality in the case of Alea Lewis, my young people asked, "How can we fix this, Dad?" I naively replied, "Don't worry, there's some sort of city department we can talk with. Would you like to write letters to them?" We found the Citizen Police Review Board on the city website and started crafting concise, direct concerns and requests with good grammar and spelling, I might add. This proud moment of encouraging participation in local government was cut short. As I learned, the CPRB has been largely ineffective in its charter to provide residents a way to voice concerns to their police department. I have full confidence in new CPRB Chair Mikhail Lubiansky, but I'd like to see a full review of CPRB processes so that we can make changes and the board can properly receive and take action on resident concerns, whether they are written in crayon or otherwise. Up next, I have Logan Middleton. The racist police violence committed towards Alea Lewis by the Urbana Police Department on April 10th is all too obviously connected to the state-sanctioned murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade. It is and has for a long time been very clear that the acts of police brutality we've seen unfold across the country this past week don't just happen elsewhere. They take place right here in our home of Champaign-Urbana. The silence and complicity of the city of Urbana with this racist police violence is unacceptable. That there has been no justice for Alea Lewis nearly 2 months after her assault is unacceptable. Continued violence towards and murder of Black people by the state is unacceptable. The city must A, drop all charges against Alea Lewis now. B, put the officers who assaulted Alea Lewis on leave ASAP. C, commit to calling for an independent investigation of this incident. And D, take steps to minimize the impact of policing by defunding and ultimately abolishing the Urbana Police Department. Next, I have Karen Linder. I am 53 years old, and I have been witnessing this same struggle all my life. It has been shown time and again that our criminal justice system and the way we police in this country is racially biased. Studies have shown that racism is systemic throughout our judicial system and throughout police departments across the country. Urbana is no different. Several years ago, after the killing of Kawani Carrington, I had thought that the Urbana Police Department was making steps to become at least a little less racially biased. I took hope in the creation of the Civilian Police Review Board. It is long past time for the Urbana Police Department to own up to its own limitations and its own systemic racism. As a community, we can do better. There are many proven ways to de-escalate, use community policing, and allow for citizen oversight that all lessen the effects racism has on policing. I demand that all charges be dropped against Alea Lewis. I demand all officers involved in her arrest be put on administrative leave. Lastly, I demand that the Civilian Police Review Board review all aspects of this arrest and that the board be allowed to review all complaints received by the UPD. Next, I have Jamie Jones. I'm writing to urge the Urbana Police Department, working together with the Citizen Police Review Board and the City Council, to acknowledge the long history of racially biased policing and to explicitly commit itself to anti-racist police practice. I urge the city to begin this work with a thorough investigation of the April 10 arrest of Alea Lewis. I hope, 1, that the changes against Alea Lewis will be dropped, 2, that a meaningful, independent, and transparent investigation into her arrest will be conducted, and 3, that the Citizen Police Review Board will become subject to meaningful oversight. Thank you. Next, I have Lila Leopold, and I do apologize to anyone who's listening if I'm getting your names wrong. Dear members of the Urbana City Council, I write as a Champaign-Urbana resident regarding the case of Alea Lewis and put my support behind fellow residents calling for all charges against Alea to be dropped, and who will continue to be attentive to how the city handles continuing proceedings and call for the following. 1, that a truly meaningful and independent investigation take place, i.e. that this not be done by the state police, in the interest of true accountability, total transparency, and maintaining trust with the community. 2, that the officers who beat Ms. Lewis be put on leave pending the investigation. 3, that reform takes place to make the Citizen Police Review Board a means of meaningful oversight and to comply with its ordinance. These actions are necessary if public office is to maintain any significant role in public life by modeling proper use of the offices and positions each member holds to make informed and intelligent decisions that protect and defend the right of each and every fellow community member, and to value each life with respect. It is critical that members of the City Council lead by example in the case of Alea Lewis. Thank you. All right, next I have Susan Jones. This is just to remind you that I'm one of the many citizens who think Urbana police should maintain high standards and expectations. They should be held to higher standards for justifying violence. I have seen our officers calmly de-escalate volatile situations. Those who can't do that should not have the responsibility of the position. Okay, next I have Aishwarya Shikara. Waria, again, I apologize if I'm getting anyone's name wrong. My name is Aisha Shikara, and I'm a senior at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I recently was made aware of Urbana's racial profiling and aggressive use of force against an uninvolved young Black youth and a Black woman. Why is the Urbana Police Department perpetrating racial and gender violence against members of our Black community? Why are Black people and people of color automatically deemed suspect, threat because of the color of our skin? Why are you afraid of us? Why are we being systematically oppressed, dehumanized, assaulted, harassed, and murdered? The color of your skin gives you privilege, resources, and national attention when something wrong happens in your community. Having a badge does not make you the law. It does not make you superior, neither does it give you the right to target and hurt people you view as the enemy. Stop taking away our humanity, stop arresting us, stop making false claims that we are armed and we are suspects just because of the way we look. We are scared of the way you look and the way you behave when you are around someone like us. Your aggressive force, Urbana Police Department, is what causes cultural mistrust between Black and brown communities and white police officers. Your actions have directly contributed to the stress, anxiety, fear, and PTSD many Black Americans face in this country due to the systemic racism their family and community has experienced for the past 400 years. City Council, by staying silent, you were complacent with this officer's action and are directly contributing to racism. You are racist. Get comfortable with those words being linked to you based on your skin color, because that is what it feels like for your body, your existence, to be racialized. Characteristics and attributes linked to your skin color based on stereotypes that white people created to bring your people down. We demand reparations and the automatic removal of the officer who hit Miss Lewis, the police officers who tried to alter the body cam footage, and those who threatened Mr. Gregory Hugger to take down the original video he posted. That's freedom of speech. You forget that the Bill of Rights applies to our colored bodies as well. If you think you are the law, then punish the lawless police officers with civil charges because you have evidence an officer punched, taunted, and hurt Miss Lewis. We all know that if she was a white woman named Karen, these actions would have already been executed to protect her. If you care about Black lives, you will do what is right and treat us with the same fairness and equality as you treat white people in Urbana. We deserve protection, and you have failed us. Prove us wrong and heal this mistrust between the people and police by taking action against those in your police force who use their badge to justify their racism. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Okay, next I have Brian Dunn. It is apparent that we are at an overdue turning point in American history. It is time to rethink and reshape how we police our community. Given the untold amount of unnecessary violence at the hands of the UPD, it is apparent that they are an improper investment for keeping our community safe. They sow dissent and distrust in the public they harm. And we as a nation are thinking beyond having strangers with guns patrolling neighborhoods and punching women. This isn't an issue with training or staffing or funding. It's an issue with compliance through fear of harm, making people subservient through terror. It is an immoral way to operate in society. Funding to police should be minimal, and police presence in communities should be minimal. We should focus on programs that nurture and care, that addresses root causes of community violence, not add to them. Urbana is an incredible and progressive leader in managing community, exemplified by the sanctuary city status. We should continue this by restricting funds to police and allowing alternatives to flourish. Social work and crisis management, along with after-school programs and community engagement, should be the goals, not gas masks, armored cars, or rubber bullets. Care for your community, do not harm it. Okay, next I have Kitty Schwartz. The community of Urbana demands for all charges against Alea Lewis to be dropped. She was wrongfully detained, and the use of excessive force was not only completely unnecessary, but incredibly wrong. We must have an independent investigation focusing on the events occurring on Good Friday, and the officers responsible for the beating of Ms. Lewis must be put on leave pending the investigation. It is not enough to call out injustice in other parts of the country. We must acknowledge the injustices present in our very own community and police force. The Urbana City Council must work towards making the Champaign-Urbana community safe for all of its citizens. It has dismantled the pattern of violence seen in both the Urbana and Champaign police departments. The community of Urbana also demands reform that makes the Citizen Police Review Board a meaningful oversight, and that the police comply with its ordinance. The system in place for citizens to file complaints and for the CPRB to review these complaints is altogether inaccessible. It is clear through the complicated rules of this bureaucratic process, the Urbana Police Department is actively seeking to make it more difficult for complaints to be filed and for the CPRB to receive any information about these complaints. This cannot stand. The Urbana Police Department must be held accountable for any and all complaints logged against them. With the events occurring all over the country in response to the murder of George Floyd, there is no better time for the city of Urbana to step up to the plate to fight racial injustice. I implore the Urbana City Council to stand against injustice in our community, particularly in the Urbana Police Department. I employ the Urbana City Council to take into account the voices of the community calling for reform in the face of violence in law enforcement. The pattern of racial injustice and violence in Urbana must end. Okay, next I have Gabby Castellanos. And just so people who are listening are aware, I'm like 1/3 of the way through. The issue of police brutality and police accountability has reached a global level of concern. Now more than ever, it is time to take complaints and concerns about police brutality seriously. Protests in the Champaign-Urbana community have already started, in continuing defense of the police behavior during the arrest of Ms. Lewis will show to the community that our voices aren't being heard. Derek Chauvin had at least 17 misconduct complaints prior to killing George Floyd. These 17 misconduct complaints weren't met with the proper ramifications. The Urbana Police Department has the opportunity to avoid being negligent, and it seems they're putting more effort into protecting police officers than they are the citizens of Urbana. Anyone who has seen the video footage of the Good Friday arrest can clearly see the police officers took the immediate action that led to the physical assault. Punishing Ms. Lewis with felony charges of up to 12 years for an incident she did not incite is inhumane, especially when the police chief admitted that the officers weren't adequately trained on de-escalation, and the UBD has not adopted the 10 shared principles. All charges against Ms. Lewis must be dropped immediately. The defenses for the police officers by the chief of police and state attorney are that no laws were violated by the police during the incident of police brutality. I will stress this point again. Now is the time to enact change. If the police officers didn't violate any laws, then the laws need to be revised. I also advocate for the following: a full independent investigation of policeman conduct with public disclosure of findings, the officers involved be put on administrative leave, the resignation of police chief for failing to respond to this incident of police brutality appropriately, and an independent investigation of Ms. Lewis' assault by officers with a taser in the jail, and redesigning the civilian review board to be a meaningful and useful process that allows for any witness to submit a complaint, has subpoena power, and has disciplinary power to take action in its findings. Next, I have Owen McDonald. My name is Owen McDonald. I'm a local resident and graduate worker at UIUC. I write to demand you hold the racist police accountable for the unjust arrest and violence done to Alea Lewis. Communities across the country and here locally are rising up in response to the anti-Black police violence inherent to modern-day policing that grows directly out of slave-catching patrols of the 19th century. The fight against the system that murdered George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, and countless others begins at home. The City Council is in a unique position to do something about this in our local community. The police should be abolished. As we work towards that, I implore that all charges against Alea Lewis be dropped, the offending officers be fired, and that investigations be done by a non-police third party. Additionally, the CPRB must be given greater power and oversight to make sure cops are held accountable in our community. All right, next I have Ron Kester. To the Mayor and Urbana City Council. The City of Urbana has a problem with accountability and administrative oversight of its police force, and the Alea Lewis case has brought this crisis to the surface. This disconnect between elected authority and the authority that is empowered to use deadly force is not a new problem. Police are trained on tactics of intimidation, coercion, and fabrication. They are legally empowered to lie in order to get business done. It's not hard to imagine how these tactics might be misused in order to get business done within city government. A case in point is the People versus Quentin Brown, a case that was dismissed by the state in 2019 for lack of evidence. The reason why the evidence was lacking, because Urbana police manufactured the results of an eyewitness lineup. The man they were trying to frame would have gone to prison for a mandatory minimum sentence of 21 years. And who was at the top of the list of the 6 Urbana police officers named in the pending lawsuit against the city of Urbana for falsifying evidence? Michael Cervantes, the same police officer who tackled Alea Lewis on April 10. What mechanisms are missing from our city government when police misconduct of this magnitude can come and go with no accountability? What sum will the public have to pay through civil litigation in order for the city to properly review its administrative obligations? The charges against Alea Lewis should be dropped. The officer who assaulted her should be placed on administrative leave pending the results of the independent investigation. And Urbana Civilian Police Review Board should be overhauled to make it more accessible to and effective for the public. All right, next I have Sylvia Mayer. With all the grief and trauma that has happened throughout the past few weeks, in addition to centuries of violence and racism against Black lives, it is imperative that Urbana take action and make changes to its police policy and citizen police review. We citizens of Urbana are calling for all charges against Alea Lewis to be dropped. We are calling for meaningful and independent investigation and for the officers who beat Ms. Lewis to be disciplined appropriately pending the investigation. We are calling for reform to make the Citizen Police Review Board a meaningful oversight and for the police department to comply with its ordinance. It is the duty of the City Council to protect the members of our community and enact change to reform corrupt organizations. Please do your part to create meaningful change for the lives of Black folks in our community. I look forward to seeing the action that you take. Next, I have Nikki Turnipseed. I write to amplify the message of community members concerned with the justice system, quotes, that enables police locally and nationally to act with impunity in violently targeting Black and brown people. The Urbana Police Department's assault on Alea Lewis is a symptom of this system, as is the red tape surrounding the Citizen Police Review Board and the review process, as it is stunted by the police department. I stand with my community in demanding that all charges against Alea Lewis be dropped, a truly meaningful and independent investigation be launched, the officers who beat Ms. Lewis be put on leave pending this investigation, and the CPRB be reformed to have meaningful oversight and comply with its ordinance so citizens don't have to jump through hoops to report misconduct. Thank you for your time. Next, I have Mary King. I live about a block south and east of where Ms. Lewis was arrested. The video of the incident was shocking, not just through the violence in both words and actions the police chose to take that day, but also in seeing a familiar park along with houses and street names. This is my neighborhood, the neighborhood in which my partner and I helped to raise his son. And it's the neighborhood we still choose to live in today. If the unrest since the killing of George Floyd is telling public servants anything, it's that trust between government authority and the people is breaking down. My neighborhood needs to know that it has a voice and a place in the city, and that we aren't seen solely as problematic or, as I have unfortunately heard, dangerous. One good faith action the Urbana City Council can take is to immediately reform the Citizen Police Review Board by giving it meaningful oversight, which is in compliance with the original ordinance. My family lives here, my neighbors' families live here, and we want to believe our city council and our police force is acting in concert with, rather than opposition to, its citizens. Thank you for your time. All right, next I have Rebecca Lynn Laurent. She sent a document, just give me a moment to open it. Okay. It has been a difficult week for this nation, to say the least, one that has forced us to open our eyes to the systemic racism and police brutality that so many of us are privileged to turn our back to every day. The difficulty in navigating this fresh grief that we feel at seeing a human being brutally murdered at the hands of the people we trust to protect us is its familiarity. We have watched this happen over and over again to our Black community members. So in this moment, where we are once again seeing the obvious effect of racism, our challenge is not to turn away and to start seeing ourselves. Our challenge is to look in the mirror and recognize the familiar patterns that weave together Minneapolis and Georgia, our community in Champaign-Urbana. We cannot recognize that racism exists without recognizing the role that each of us play in allowing it to. Urbana is no exception to the microcosm we just saw in Minneapolis. It's past time to look in the mirror. Alea Lewis was brutally beaten by Urbana police while the city of Urbana condoned it with a clearly one-sided and grossly misleading press release echoed by the News Gazette and perpetuated by the chief of police. There was absolutely no conceivable reason for these efforts to knee and hit Miss Lewis while she was face down on the ground in handcuffs, defenseless. The patterns are particularly obvious now, and we refuse to look away. One bad police officer doesn't murder a Black citizen. They do so with a police department in a city that ignores the warning signs and allows for racial profiling and brutality to go on without repercussions. They do so with a community where racism runs rampant and white people turn away. So you don't get to grieve and forget George Floyd. You don't get to explain and ignore Alea Lewis. None of us do. These are not isolated events, and treating them as such is precisely how the cycle perpetuates. We are done. We are looking in the mirror, and we demand better. I try to echo the demands of so many community members who have already expressed disgust at the treatment of Alea Lewis. Drop all charges against Alea Lewis. Stop displacing blame from violent racist police officers on their survivors. It's childish, embarrassing, and it's racist. Conduct a truly meaningful and independent investigation and put the officers who beat Miss Lewis on leave pending the investigation. Start prioritizing Black lives over the image of Urbana police. It's childish and embarrassing, and it's racist. Reform the Citizen Police Review Board so that it may provide meaningful oversight and comply with its ordinance. Police don't run this community. We do. This is the moment. You have the power, and we are watching. All right, next I have Jean Ward. My name is Jean Ward, and I'm a resident of Ward 7 in Urbana. I was unable to participate in today's protest or city council meeting, but I want to make my voice heard to you all anyhow. As I'm sure you are feeling, I'm very concerned about the multiple situations facing our country and our community. Although COVID-19 is a relatively new challenge, the challenge of racism has been in existence for far too long. I have generally been impressed with law enforcement in this community. I've seen many officers doing good work and interfacing with the community in positive ways. However, I'm writing about several concerns. It is my understanding that as a city council, you have yet to adopt the 10 shared principles put together by the NAACP in cooperation with the Illinois law enforcement. After reading these principles carefully, I must urge you to pass them immediately and then do whatever training is necessary in our local police forces to ensure that they are followed. A couple of these principles stood out in particular. One of them refers to procedural justice, including the pillars of fairness, voice, transparency, and impartiality. The area of voice has not been fully followed through on, although I feel you as a council had some good intentions. It is my understanding that our Civilian Police Review Board, which would be a great vehicle for the opportunity to have a voice in terms of justice, has not been operating fully in the last 5 years and has not been filling the reports they are to be filing. This is so important in order for our community members to be able to develop the trust in law enforcement that would make your job easier and would provide the community with better service. The other item that jumped out was the necessity for de-escalation training. I just retired from being a teacher at Cunningham Children's Home for 27 years. We are trained twice a year in therapeutic crisis intervention, TCI, which spends a great deal of time on de-escalation training and also on safe use of physical restraint if necessary. We know that as employees at Cunningham, we are to use that physical restraint only as a very last resort, and that attempts to de-escalate must happen first if at all possible. If we do have to use physical restraint, one of the things that is taught most strongly is that if anyone complains that they cannot breathe, you must always adjust the hold, even if you believe their breathing is not impeded. We are also taught that if we notice other staff member seems to be drawn into a power struggle with one of our students, we are to tap them out in order to keep the situation as calm as possible. It is only by trusting each other this works. After watching the horrific video of George Floyd's murder last week, I can only think that if I was trained in that sort of skill, surely our horrific video of George Floyd's murder last week, or surely our police officers must be monitored to be sure that they're using the skills they are trained in. I must say my thoughts also went in that direction after watching the video of our local police officers punching an unarmed woman earlier this spring. It is hard to imagine that de-escalation strategies were being effectively employed in that situation before it turned to violence. I urge you as a city council to ensure that these 10 shared principles are passed tonight if possible, and that they are carried out with all possible care and urgency. I urge you, Chief Serafin, to review de-escalation training and principles with your officers thoroughly and often. I urge all of you to be sure that our Civilian Police Review Board is a real thing and that it does careful work and is accountable to you and the community. Thank you so much for your service and attending to these matters with great care.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
As co-host, could I suggest that we go to the people who are waiting to speak? They've been waiting for a while. It's already 9 o'clock, and
Okay.
I really would like to get their comments into the record. We have emails that we can always enter into the record and be part of the meeting, and it would give you a break too.
Fair enough. It's been going hard at it. Okay, folks, well, we're gonna switch gears here real quick. I'm gonna start calling on people, public participants, folks who've had their hand raised. Some of you I've seen for a while. Thanks everyone for listening to me read and talk for an hour. I appreciate it, but we would like to hear what everyone else has to say. I'd like to start with, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Mikhail Lubyansky. You're unmuted if you're around.
Yeah, thank you. Can you turn on the video, or is that unnecessary?
We're not doing video sharing, but everyone can hear you.
Okay, very good. Good evening. My name is Mikhail Lubansky. I've lived in Urbana for the past 16 years. I am the brand new chair of the CPRB, and I will address you from the perspective of this position. But I want to be clear that my comments here are only my own and do not necessarily represent the rest of the CPRB. I want to start with just a couple words of gratitude. Like so many others, I'm extremely upset by the murder of George Floyd. I'm grateful to everyone across the country for peacefully protesting and organizing for justice. I'm heartened in particular to see so many law enforcement officers across the country take a knee in solidarity and otherwise support those who are protesting. I hope that all of us can see that justice, particularly race-based justice, is something that we all want, all need, and all carry the responsibility to work towards. Councilmember Jacobson talked about restorative justice. As someone who has been practicing restorative justice for over 10 years, I want to echo his call and underscore that restorative justice is not just for healing relationships. It is also about addressing unmet community needs, including, of course, examining, in collaboration with African American and other communities of color, police hiring and use of force policies, as well as police workplace culture to ensure that our communities are policed in ways that match our values and honor everyone's humanity. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, but anyone who has been following national and local news understands that it could just as easily have happened somewhere else, including Urbana. A couple words, just information about the CPRB, since we seem to be focusing a lot on that. The Urbana CPRB is essentially an appeals board. Apart from reviewing all TASER deployment by the Urbana Police Department, which we have been doing since the UPD acquired TASERs, what this means is that when Urbana residents have a complaint about police conduct, that complaint is investigated by the chief of police or someone designated by the chief, who then issues a findings letter either affirming the complaint or determining that it was unfounded. Upon receiving this letter, the complainant has the right to appeal within a given number of days. Those appeals go to the CPRB, which means that most complaints about police conduct are never reviewed by the CPRB. In fact, my understanding is that since the CPRB was created 7 years ago, which is before my time, it has reviewed a total of just 4 appeals. In the case of Aaliyah Lewis, as the mayor mentioned in her opening remarks, the city has hired an independent consultant to investigate what happened. I have no reason to doubt the competency of the firm. It may well be that they are more experienced and better able to review what happened than our CPRB. I wish them well, and like others in attendance here, look forward to their conclusions. But it is notable to me that the city decided to bypass the CPRB when this commission literally exists to do exactly this sort of thing. I'm not sure what it means that we were bypassed, but the other CPRB members and I do not want to do nothing. We volunteered to be on this board because we believe in the necessity of civilian oversight of policing. We want to be engaged in those efforts and need the support of the council to do so. As the chair of the CPRB, I support the calls for reform. In particular, I would like to see the CPRB be empowered to review all complaints, not just the appeals, and to have subpoena power to aid our investigation. I thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you. I'm gonna go down the list from folks that I saw afterwards. Next we'll go to Alan Axelrod.
Bear with me, I have to mute the police scanner. All right, muted. Okay. So I first wanted to start off by acknowledging some exceptional comments that were made tonight by our public officials, namely starting with Bill Brown for recommending the city of Urbana not use a police agency for the third-party review. It sounds like a firm was already selected, so I would just like to state my appreciation for that. Also to Jared Miller for stating in no uncertain terms that he believes that the city council ought to have a more direct hand in police oversight in appreciable and valid detail. There were a lot of other notable comments, but I also wanted to turn to Eric Jacobson for sharing his deeply personal experience, which is something that I do not have, where he had talked about his black child having been assaulted where the assailant was not charged. To that I say, thank you for sharing. That's not easy to do. And Aaliyah Lewis's parents can relate. we have to hold the police to higher standards of public accountability. And we have to also note that restorative justice does not mean charging the victim with the crime of being assaulted by a police officer who did not de-escalate. The main thing that I want to hammer home here, without going into all the other additional points, because it's been a very long evening, is that there's been over a month of comments saying, drop the charges against Aaliyah Lewis, drop the charges against Aaliyah Lewis. And you see more people saying it tonight, maybe because that's the right thing to do. And while you might not have the immediate authority to drop the charges, you have not recommended that, and you could do that. I'll leave all the other statements for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Next, I've got Donald Owen.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the City Council and the Mayor and the Chief of Police for, one, acknowledging that the murder of George Floyd was a murder, that it was not an act of police action, that it was an extra action that does classify as murder. Today, we witnessed a community coming together to make demands around justice, accountability, and reform. That call for justice is both national, related to George Floyd, as well as local, related to Aaliyah Lewis. And Aaliyah Lewis, as we've all heard, there are lots of calls for this. Mine is slightly different, and I've had several conversations with members of council individually, and I'd like to summarize that not only did we see her interaction with Urbana police play out live on Facebook on April 10th, but then the state's attorney, the city council, and the mayor proceeded to violate her again on April 27th by having a meeting where she was put on trial and violating her Sixth Amendment rights to the U.S. Constitution. As a former history teacher, I would be happy to give a presentation about the Sixth Amendment and how those rights are violated, but I will let those of you listening look it up. The second piece was accountability. You, as elected members of the City Council, you swore to uphold, among other things, the Constitution of the United States by allowing Julia Reitz, the state's attorney, to present evidence that Aaliyah Lewis could not defend herself against, or that she had no knowledge of or gave permission to allow. You put her on trial already. She no longer has the ability to have a trial by jury because it's not impartial. And finally is reform. I've been asked by several people to submit an application to be a member of the Citizen Review Board. And before I did that, I did a little research, and I realized, as Mr. Lubansky so clearly stated, that this Citizen Review Board is not really a review board, but it's an appeals board. And it's not even an appeals board, it's an appeals review board. And I'm hearing background noise. And before I would ever submit my name to be a part of the Citizen Review Board, we need to see lots of reforms. Mr. Lubansky stated that it needs to be not just an appeals board, but there needs to be accountability built in. It needs to have subpoena power. And I would echo what Gene Ward said. The 10 shared principles need to be adopted immediately. And then beyond that, you need to go much farther because the principles are, I would say, soft. The calls for reform that I heard today were much stronger than those 10 shared principles. I'll put the rest in writing and I will submit it to the board for your review. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, next I have S.M. Brown. You should be unmuted now. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Shamir Brown.
Go ahead, Shamir.
Okay. I wanted to say to you, I appreciate what you said earlier when you were sort of giving a kind of a heartfelt take on some of the things you've been witnessing. I don't get to see something like that too often, so I appreciate that. My comments would be directed more towards the mayor. I feel like I hear a lot of people being willing to be great community participants and even city council people in terms of kind of trying to iron out some of these things, but it would be my thought that mayors and police chiefs have actual kind of button pressing power in order to influence what goes on with police officers and agents of the law in terms of what they do and don't feel that they can get away with as they carry out their duties. And I would like to see both mayors of both towns, because we are in the Twin City, make a really good push to kind of influence the situations to where police don't feel so insulated by their superiors in terms of the way they conduct themselves. Because I believe that's the only way that we can start to reach a point where this change that we're speaking about actually happens. I feel like there's too much sort of, there's too much confusion as to who's actually in charge. And the people seem not to know where to go to get the answers that they're looking for. And I don't believe it's actually that hard, because we actually do know who's in charge and we actually do know who can push the buttons. And I'd really like to see both mayors, and since Mrs. Marlin is in here today, which I appreciate, I'd like to see her make that push on her side of the fence if she can do so.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I have Minnie Pearson. It's not being able to seem to unmute her. Jason, can you try unmuting her, please?
Can you hear me now?
You should be on.
Okay. With me, I have talked with the mayor, and so I want to thank you all for our previous meetings and dialogue together on how we can, get something started here with our policing. With me, the violence started with Emmett Till, Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, Arbery, and Miss Taylor. But now George Ford, he's died and was murdered by police. And it brought back a thought in my head that during the time when Aaliyah Lewis had her encounter with the Urbana police, thank God she did not hit her head or damage herself in a way where we would have had another Minnesota here. And getting that image out of my head is really hard. The image of a police officer with his knee on a Black man's head or anyone's head, even an animal's head. Animal activists, animal people would have been all over that immediately. It was too quiet. It was just too quiet. Myself, as the NAACP Champaign County Branch President, I struggled. I had so many emotions, especially when this young person called out for his mother, because I'm a mother. And Miss Lewis, who was clearly impaired. And hopefully we can continue to work on that. And I agree with all of the letters that's been read and the comments that's been said tonight. But with me coming from Greenville, Mississippi in the 60s and 70s, I have seen some violent things happen to Black people. And it has never, ever left us. 400 years. And we're still here seeing the same things. The only difference is it's being filmed so we can see it. But the comfort of a person who can do what happened to Mr. Floyd in the broad open daytime, he was confident that he would not have to answer for his charges of murder. It was comfortable, too comfortable. And sometimes I think our police officers are too comfortable, and they feel as though they can do and push Black people, especially policing us differently than they police any other race of people. This is unacceptable. And as we know right now, it is very painful. People are hurting, they're grieving, and I'm mourning at the loss of this man. So I know my time is just about up, but let me make this point. Someone asked me at the march today, how did we get to this point? And my answer to that person was, we never did leave that point. We're still here in this safe spot today. So I'm hoping that we can do whatever we can as a community, still as the council. You're gonna have to come out of your comfort zone and do the right things. You're gonna have to do that. And other than that, there will never be trust. There will never be respect. We will always have to walk around fearful that our lives are not worth even a dog. You wouldn't treat a dog the way that person was treated. So with that in mind, I'm just going to stop because I could go on and on. Thank you.
Thank you, Minnie. All right, up next, we have Ben, just as Ben. Jason, you want to hit his unmute button? I think we did it at the same time. Ben, you should be there. Are you there?
Yes, Ricardo Diaz.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I am Ricardo Diaz. I've been a resident of Urbana for the last 12 years. And today, although I don't represent the board as Mikhail either, I am also a member of the CPRB. As I mentioned before, the limitations of the board are by ordinance, but it is still very much an appeals, a review board beyond the access of most people. So the Good Friday case with Ms. Lewis doesn't have to be addressed directly here for the objections of many have been, but I think the public and the board deserve an explanation as to why we did not use the CPRB to bridge dialogue and learn from each other, because this is not going to be the only case that we'll have in our town, sadly. Skipping the board on this has really made this very bridge installed for communication to flow to be weakened, and it's time to fortify it. At the last meeting of the board that we had, we proposed to make some changes. Our April meeting was canceled without our consent. And I think that from my perspective, I align myself with others to signal, to mark, and then to make the changes that the board's rules, powers, and procedures get made. It's not only correct and right that the complaints should come directly to the board, that there is some investigative power, but we also need very simple things. We need an accessible complaint form online with the appropriate procedures for safeguarding it. The notarized requirement on the complaints had its purposes, but in this day and age, just as today's meeting on Zoom, which I laud everyone involved to make it, it really gives access to a lot more people. Checks can be put into place. If Champaign and other cities can do it online, so can we. Procedures for responding to residents when complaints are made and when our decisions are made certainly need to be reformed. The letters need to be understandable. There should be an opportunity for dialogue while still complying with the law. So I guess what I'm saying is that the relationship between the city police force and the community requires still more oversight and collaboration. We can have an independent review board that can do this. I have learned a lot as being member of the board. I have learned a lot about how the police people, they are also people, need to balance the danger and the liabilities and just the care for different people. But just because I understand them better, I say to myself, why doesn't somebody else teach us, teach the rest of the community why they are caught in situations in which they end up getting justified by investigative groups, and they're given what seems to be protection when really all it is the best possible outcome given the many bad factors that can happen. So I address myself to the city council members first, in that I empathize with much of what you said. The power to review and to change the board, I think, can be very well made through you, but in collaboration, the specific changes. And I look forward to working with other members of the community to make some of these changes. Lastly, I have to say the community, including the police chiefs and the mayors, but just everyone being out today in such a it was moving. So I think that we have the right town to make positive changes that can be examples for the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Next, we have Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood. Dr. Underwood, you should be unmuted. Dr. Underwood, are you there? I'm not hearing a response from her, so we'll keep moving. Keep your hand raised. I'll try and call on you again. Danielle Chenoweth.
Waiting to be. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Danielle.
Great. My name is Danielle Chenoweth. I live at 412 West Illinois in Urbana, and I've lived here since 1995. The story of George Floyd has already happened here in Champaign-Urbana. Greg Brown was suffocated by Champaign police behind a dumpster on White Street in Champaign, begging for his life in 2000. This is one of the reasons we founded the Independent Media Center. In 2009, 15-year-old unarmed Kewan Carrington was killed by Chief Finney, who went on to make over $100,000 a year advising police departments. Kewan and his family still have no justice to this day. We are lucky Aaliyah Lewis is still alive, but she is deeply traumatized by her torture by Urbana police. And then watching city leaders justify this torture, tell her she sustained no injuries when you denied her medical care so there would be no documentation of those injuries, and tell her she has to learn how to interact with the police as the solution. Please review the documentation and take note. While the police had her on the ground, she told them, if you have a female police officer, she can come search me. She told your officers what they needed to do to secure the scene and her compliance. Instead, male officers initiated contact and she freaked out and the police beat her in response. Once she is in custody, down. Instead, they force her into a squad car and end up putting a hood on her head and shackles on her legs. This will have a lifetime for her to recover from this trauma. Listen to the audio. Everything that Aaliyah says shows she felt racially profiled, disrespected, and treated less than human. Everything she says was fighting for her dignity. No one has justified why Officer Ruff kneed her in the rib. You should listen to the audio again. He strikes her right after she calls him a racist. This is a racially charged incident. I helped to create the Civilian Review Board of Police when I served on City Council in 2007. It was greatly watered down by the council and the mayor at the time. Looking at the shambles the CPRB is in now, I wonder if I should have voted it down then. I see that it has been useless during this time. And honestly, I feel shame that I put it forward. The CPRB is a tool that can work in your favor. It can show you data and patterns to address problems before they spin out of control. If you want to avoid a death by police, you must have real oversight. The fact that the CPRB has repeatedly violated its ordinance and is highly managed by the police shows we need hands-on management by elected leaders now. An independent investigation needs the following. First, you must put Officer Ruff and Cervantes on administrative leave for this investigation to be credible. Two, the investigation must be done by an organizational credible to the community, not a police department. Three, you and the investigator must look at patterns of behavior and complaints of specific officers, Ruff and Cervantes. In particular, look at the Quentin Brown case and the behavior of Officer Cervantes. The investigator must review the many hours of public input, which has been well researched. We are a contribution to this investigation. We are not a sideshow. Racial prejudice must be part of the review. It is central and core to this conversation. The resulting report must be released to the public. The investigation must look at police policy and use of force. Chief Seraphim has said unequivocally that the behavior of Cervantes and Ruff was justified. This calls into question the entire use of force policy and police policies, and they should be looked at carefully. I will end by saying, I know my time is up, that the worst trauma oftentimes comes from how people respond to the violence after it has happened. And I want you, the city leadership, to see your role in perpetuating that trauma. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Danielle. Next, I have Sarah Nixon.
Is my mic unmuted?
Yes, Sarah, we can hear you.
Thank you. So, City Council, my name is Sarah Nixon, and I'm a resident of Urbana. Briefly, I want to avoid unnecessary repetition, but when inaction continues in the face of grievous injustice, repeating the message does become essential. And so I will speak again in advocacy for Leah Lewis, who, as you know, has suffered unprovoked attack, arrest, jailing, tasing, and prosecution simply for trying to ask an Urbana cop a question. Today, the Champaign-Urbana newspaper reported just a few hours ago, actually, that Chief Cobb of the Champaign Police Department and Urbana police officers bent down on one knee with the protesters, of which I was one this afternoon. This was a touching gesture of solidarity, a symbol of the very human and racially diverse side of law enforcement. And Chief Seraphim and the mayor walked with the peaceful protesters. Some citizens, seasoned activists who've chanted and marched for decades in circles around government misconduct and corruption, and other citizens who are feeling very weary and raw, having personally suffered police brutality, would say that that was also a great photo op, a PR stunt staged with the media. How are we the people to decide which interpretation rings more true? If the state's attorney goes forward with the wrongful criminal charges against Leah Lewis, then Chief Cobb's gesture, as well as the assertion that Chief Seraphim and Mayor Marlin walked among us today in solidarity with our protest, becomes a joke. It is a truism that the vocation of law enforcement attracts the very best among us, and also the very worst. I'm speaking now again to the best among you at the Urbana Police Department, to those officers who feel frustration, and to those whose morale is being badly impacted by the Leah Lewis fiasco and by racist policing and cover-up generally. And I'm speaking above all, once again, to the leadership when I say, on behalf of our community, that I renew my call for the city government and the UPD to move forward with great humility and great courage, and to start by recommending to the state's attorney that all charges against Ms. Lewis be dropped immediately without further fanfare and without further review theatrics. In closing, I am struck and not a little troubled that there's been much reference today in official statements to the cold-blooded murder of George Floyd, and yet so little said about Aaliyah Lewis. Yet from the perspective of the African-American community, but for the grace of God, there went she. And as a footnote, I commend the new chair of the Citizens Police Review Board who talks about reform and restorative justice. City Council, you need to empower this board to begin its restorative justice program, starting with Ms. Lewis.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, I have Vijay Patel.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on.
All right. So I'll keep this brief. I initially had hoped to call in to discuss the topic of today's protest, which is, as we all know now, systematic police violence that seems endemic in our town, amongst so many others. But it's clear now that these topics have been amply addressed by the comments that Jared has read out to us at length, and that the City Council has no plans to engage in a conversation about this today, and it's going to be pushed off to a later meeting. So instead, I'd like to address another issue that this meeting has made glaringly obvious. And actually, that's each of you, the City Council, and what you've made us sit through this evening. So this meeting was billed as a public input session, and at the planned start time, we quickly maxed out participants. We saw that we had 100+ people trying to join, but instead of actually engaging with public input then, you managed to spend an entire hour discussing your own perspectives and experiences, while allowing the Urbana Police Department chief, who's perhaps the most important stakeholder present at the meeting, to leave after a 5-minute prepared statement. So what kind of statement does that, what kind of message does that send? Only that Urbana PD has no interest in hearing our concerns, and that you all, the City Council, have either little interest or ability to ensure that they do. And to the mayor, if the Wednesday session is going to be too busy to adequately address this topic, you need to make time. You can call a new meeting. You guys just don't seem to get it. When marchers are out there, 1,000 people or so today, yelling no justice, no peace, they mean it. And by they mean it, I mean we mean it. And so by the time I'm reading this, the majority of those who are on the streets today, who would have been so eager to participate to make our local government more effective, will already have left. I mean, you can see right now there's 58 participants on this call, probably because they have better things to do on a workday than listen indefinitely to what largely should be reserved for your personal Facebook pages and re-election campaigns. And so I urge you all to think about what it means that you've taken this opportunity for community input and made it largely about yourselves and bereft of any opportunity for conversation with community members. This is not a conversation. Me reading this statement, half the members not on video, and then just moving on to the next one is not a conversation. Oh, and specifically to Bill Brown, earlier this meeting, you mentioned that you recently became aware that Champaign has a more effective review board system. This is something that a 5-minute Google search could have told you. And this is after weeks of public complaints on this issue. I mean, in my opinion, that just means maybe you should find another way to contribute to this community. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Scott Dossett, you are next.
Hello.
You're unmuted.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, good conversation. My initial call-in was item 4 on your agenda, particularly the CPRB reports. I'm the lone surviving original member. And so I'll do most of that input Wednesday when the next meeting comes, as I understand it. But I want to thank everyone for their comments about the review board and criticisms. I would suggest that people who want to be critical about the way the board functions read the ordinance and understand it. I think we have a problem inside the Human Relations Office at the City of Urbana, which causes a lot of slowdown in the things that we do, and kind of feels as if staff facilitation for this board has been kind of a hot potato kind of issue. And so I hope that we can get some improvement in that and begin a more thoughtful and systematic review of all complaints issued through the 3 different portals that we have, and try to make ourselves into a more viable institution in the community. I can only echo Mikel and Ricardo, who said that those of us that spend our time on the board do that because we really do want to do community service. And it pains me to hear Danielle look back at the history of the way the ordinance was written and the board was founded, although I think she and I probably agree on that. So I thank everyone for their time, and I'm finished.
Thank you. Tracy Chong, you're up next. Just wait a moment and we'll unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Tracy.
Okay, hi, my name is Tracy Chong from Urbana. Chief Seraphin, you tell us today that you feel shocked and anger watching the murder of George Floyd by police officers. But at the same time, you gave a presentation justifying your officers beating, kneeing, and pinning Aaliyah Lewis to the ground. That seems extremely hypocritical. Must someone die before you feel shock and anger? Mayor Marilyn and council members, you have heard so much from the public. Yet every meeting in the past few weeks, we were met with silence. You had a choice to respond, yet you chose not to. Not until today, after George Floyd was murdered. That's sad and not what we residents expect from elected officials. City council meeting agendas are set up in a way in which the public input session feels like a checkbox to get over with. On to the next item, so that there's conveniently no response from city council members. It's also set up in a way that the city always has the last say. For example, after Chief Seraphin's presentation, no one could say anything until the next week. This Wednesday, the public will have no way to comment about the CPRB report that will be presented, and we will have to wait until the following week to provide input. Maybe this is something that you guys can discuss and change. The city's action after the beating of Aaliyah Lewis by Urbana police officers showed residents that protecting the city's and Urbana Police Department's image was the highest priority. Up till today, UPD and the city is still maintaining that the violence shown by police officers is according to policy. Sergeant James Corey-Coker, Sergeant Michael Cervantes, and Officer Eric Ruff are still not put on leave pending the independent investigation. Complete body camera footage of all police officers involved are still not released to the public. Charges against Ms. Lewis still have not been dropped. Moving forward, I have concerns regarding Elizabeth Hannon's memorandum about the CPRB reporting that was supposed to happen tonight. City Ordinance requires an annual report from the CPRB to the Mayor and City Council. In the memorandum, it says that city staff will provide a report for CPRB to review prior to presentation to Council. This seems like city staff is still basically running the show, which is one of the major problems. Does this mean that city staff still controls which complaints they want the CPRB to see? Will CPRB members have access to all complaints, including the ones that city staff and UPD refuse to accept as complaints? Mayor Marlin and City Council members, if you don't examine the CPRB and police review process with a critical eye, if you continue to ignore how city staff refuses to release public documents through the FOIA process, if you collude with the police to justify misconduct, if you don't hold the police accountable, it is only a matter of time. It is only a matter of time when someone else in our city is killed at the hands of police officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Next, we have Christopher.
Hello?
You're live, Chris.
Okay, thanks. My name is Christopher Hansen. I live in Urbana. I see a lot of people attending today's meeting, and I'm not sure how many have been following City Council for the past 7 weeks, but most of those meetings involved between 10 and 30 people speaking about police misconduct. And the vast majority of that public input was given no recognition by city council members. Most of those meetings, the council members all stayed completely silent. And when we did hear a response, we heard Chief Serafin and Mayor Marlin and some other council members repeatedly try to defend the police and blame the victim. And as I think about the situation today, weeks later, I really think some of you, namely Chief Serafin and Mayor Marlin, have gone so far in the wrong direction that you just won't ever regain the public trust again. At a meeting which was supposed to be all about public input today, I listened to the mayor and the city council speak about themselves for over an hour. From my perspective, much of this commentary seemed self-serving. You sat in silence for weeks and you ignored the problem of police misconduct for years. So now the question isn't just about finding fixes for police misconduct, but about how to fix a broken mayor and a broken city council. I heard Chief Serafin say today that he supports investigative efforts into the George Floyd death. Well, that's just great. But I did not hear Bryant Serafin say anything about Urbana's Civilian Police Review Board. Bryant, if you're still on the call, why don't you tell the public how many police complaints you've denied this year? Why don't you tell the public how you think that denying police complaints helps build trust? I was out at the demonstration today and I happened upon Chief Serafin and Mayor Marlin and I asked them what they thought about changing the police complaint process. Chief Serafin said he had no comment. Mayor Marlin said she had no comment. Then in Champaign, I saw Chief Cobb and Mayor Finan make a similar public appearance, and I endeavored to ask them about the Champaign Police Review Board. Chief Cobb had no comment. Mayor Finan refused to comment at all. And then Cobb and Finan and all of the city staff fled as the public tried to calmly ask them questions. It seems to me that most of our city officials use today's demonstration as nothing more than a PR opportunity, and this is just more of the same. Today, I heard Bill Brown say that Urbana has rigorous police hiring practices. Well, the evidence indicates that you're wrong. And I'd like to point out that out of about 60 police officers in Urbana, maybe one of them actually lives in Urbana, and most of our officers don't live in the CU area at all, but come from the all-white towns nearby. I heard Dennis Roberts say that he hears us. Well, if it would have been nice if you had given some thought of something more to say about the subject during the past 7 meetings rather than remaining silent most of the time. I heard Jared say we need to have a conversation, we need to talk about this. Well, the public has been trying to have a conversation for nearly 2 months and we all feel shut out. I have one request right now, which is that whatever you do in terms of a police review process or a review of the Alea Lewis arrest, I want you to add into that review that whomever you hire needs to review the Urbana Police Department review of the arrest. And I want them to explain or tell the public if they think UPD's review, which they presented on April 27th, was satisfactory. And I think you should really consider including that in that investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. I would just, before we do our last 2 folks who are in here, encourage anyone still on the call, still listening, if you voiced a comment tonight, to send to citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us either a summary of your comments or a transcript of your comments if you prepared a statement. It's always good to be able to reference back to the direct word. So just encourage to do that. Up next, Ben J. Ben, you sound very distant. I don't know if that sounds the same way as everybody else, but I can barely hear him.
Yeah, I'm not too sure if Ben is still on the call. I hear him listening on delay because I heard your voice. Ben, are you still there?
Hello.
Ben, are you there now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there's a little bit of echo going on. I don't know if you're watching the stream as well or something, but
Yeah, sorry about that. So thank you for being on here still tonight. I'm going to try and keep this short, but I want to briefly go into this is Ben Jocelyn, Urbana resident for a long time, born here. Want to talk a little bit about how it's not just Derek Chauvin who killed George Floyd. Before he committed this murder, there were 17 complaints about his improper use of force. He was allowed to stay on the force, and that led to this violence, and everyone who failed to review and rebuke and curtail his actions are complicit in the murder of George Floyd. Officer Cervantes also had multiple complaints filed against him, most of them not seen by our review process, which continues to be wholly inadequate. And everyone who has rejected those claims and has played a part in the Urbana city government who fails to then curtail his actions makes themselves complicit in the further racist violence perpetrated on our citizens. It is not a matter simply of one person doing a bad thing, but instead a culture that continues to be perpetuated systemically in this town as well as across the nation. I don't really care what the review boards find. I'm not going to ask for an independent or a more intelligent one. You have months of comments and thousands of people walking in your street saying this is not the way we want to be treated. So I do not care one iota about what the review people come back with. Any further violence done to the Black people in this community, to the non-white people in this community, to the queer people in this community, to the poor white people in this community, and everyone in this community who is treated violently by the police is because we continue to have policies that when people get beat up, our police chief comes and puts a presentation in front of all of us that says, this is how they followed the rules. The problem is not simply that someone didn't follow the rules. The problem is that they're following the rules, and the rules allow us to be continually subjugated and the victims of violence. So it doesn't matter to me, once again, what your review finds. It is incumbent upon all of you to realize that what exists is A, racist, B, violent, and to do something different. You need to defund the police, and you need to fund community programs. We've said this again and again and again. You need to defund the police. You need to fund community programs. Chief Seraphin proved himself unfit for the office by presenting this thing that says the way that the police are functioning is the way that they should be. The mayor continues to prove herself incompetent by not standing for racial justice. Walking in the streets is nothing compared to policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. The last person I have with a hand up is Shannon. I'll save the last name. Please state your name for the record when your mic gets unmuted here in just a sec. Shannon,
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thanks. My name is Shannon Brunash. And
go ahead.
Okay. I'm a graduate student at the University of Illinois, and like many others in our community, I find the violent incident against Alea Lewis extremely upsetting, and I agree that urgent actions by the government are needed. Ms. Lewis deserved respect, and de-escalation was the correct response in this situation. But she received absolutely no respect from the officers and was instead met with unwarranted physical violence. It's undeniable that both racism and sexism were involved. Some of the most important things that need to be done is that police must be quickly punished for doing things like this, now and in the future. I'm absolutely disgusted that these officers are still working as police, which is my understanding. The officers who beat Ms. Lewis must be put on leave immediately, pending the investigation, and charges against Ms. Lewis must be dropped immediately because she was the victim here. I also watched the mayor of Urbana's video made after the incident, and saying that the police showed professionalism was extremely disrespectful and racist because it's not taking this incident seriously. And I would also like to implore you to make the Citizen Police Review Board a meaningful oversight and comply with its ordinance. We urgently need reform to prevent people from being incarcerated, especially now, unless there is a very good reason, and punish police officers who exhibit such repulsive misconduct. If the city of Urbana doesn't want to continue the racism and injustice they have shown so far, they need to take urgent action now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. All right, I have one more hand pop up. Taylor Dent. Jason, do you see that hand?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, you're live.
Okay. My name is Taylor Dent, and I moved to the Champaign-Urbana community when I was 5 years old. It's unfortunate that we spent the first almost 2 hours listening to a band of individuals whites blame Black pain. I think we all know that if the hearts of those in charge stay the same, we will never see a social change in this community. There's no sense of urgency to cater to or incorporate diversity into social education or financial or judicial institutions within this community. Many of the people who need to be on this call, listening to this conversation, are often pushed out of the conversation before it begins. How so? Because they are brought up in the education system that is a mere microcosm of our penal system. Black people in this community do not feel comfortable, and we are not made to feel comfortable at early stages in our lives. It starts first in the classroom where students are over-policed and made to believe that their existence is an issue. It's no surprise that when we are adults, we begin to be over-policed in the streets of our own communities where we pay taxes. Our police departments are comprised of individuals who have the privilege of removing themselves from communities in which they wreak havoc first. Your silence and your complacency as members and leaders of this community enables a system that continues to perpetuate the brutality and murder of Black and brown people through this community and greater society. Until we understand that our neighbors deserve to live out their basic human freedoms, we will not see change. I urge you all to first change your hearts so then you can change the lives of the people that you impact. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do not see any hands up that have not yet been raised and called on. If you were in the meeting and you would like to make a comment before we issue our continuance to the next Wednesday meeting, please raise your hand and I'll call on you now. All right, I have one hand up from Precious Kelly. You should be live.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
For the record, my name is Precious Kelly, and I don't have much to say, but I do want to say, coming from the Black community, that I do think every citizen who took the time to voice their concerns about what's happening with social justice, your voices are heard, and I will continue to pray that hearts are changed and that we can collaborate and bring justice for everyone.
Okay, thank you. I had one more hand come up from Lisa. I'm gonna save you to say your last name yourself so I don't screw it up. Just give us a second and you should get unmuted.
Yes, I'm Lisa Schick, and I actually live in Savoy, but I wanted to hear the meeting. I'm just really surprised that you guys that people have not brought charges against this woman already. I mean, it's clear that she didn't do anything. I mean, I looked at the video and she was just walking away and she was attacked. And if anybody can't see that, you're blind, you need to go get new prescription glasses. It's just ridiculous. So I'm just shocked that that after this length of time, you guys have not dropped the charges against her. And I think it's excusable, and that's all I had to say.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Okay, if there was anyone else who wanted to make a comment at this time, please raise your hands. I'm not seeing any other hands go up. Before we make a motion, I just wanted to, oh, Sharice, I see you waving at me.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, there was Scott Dossett and Reverend Dr. Evelyn.
Scott did speak. I just don't think his hand got lowered, and I don't see the Reverend's hand up.
Well, she was there, and then I guess it just went off. Okay, but I did see her hand.
I saw it. I tried to call on her. We unmuted her, but I didn't hear her. I don't know if she was just listening or if she raised her hand unintentionally.
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to let folks know, we've seen a lot of comments about there not being a dialogue, about council not speaking when the public is talking to us. And personally, I've definitely heard those concerns. That's why I'm calling for a special city council meeting where this is the only thing that we talk about, that we would be open to have presentations given to us by members of the public, and that we could have a dialogue back and forth with the public. I guess it's traditional that the city council does not use public input methods as a back and forth time for dialogue. I think that we usually receive input, and if there's a discussion item, we talk about it, and perhaps we just need to be more conscientious about how we do that, so folks know that we are hearing them and we are taking their considerations into account. I know we have also said that there was probably not going to be public input at the next meeting because we did it for this one, and it's a continuance of this meeting, which is a procedural thing that I think we can bypass and still be able to receive input from the public. I don't know what the procedure is to make sure that we are able to do that, but I will certainly advocate for it. Before what we're going to do tonight to end this meeting is I need a motion and a second to continue the meeting to the next planned meeting, which is this upcoming Wednesday at 7 p.m. And I didn't see any information that we needed a vote to do so. Just a motion and a second was enough. If any council members know differently, please let me know.
I'm sorry, Jared, I want to double check with the deputy clerk. I think that she received a couple of emails. So let me find her here on this call and ask her to unmute just to make sure that city clerk didn't see any separate emails there. Wendy, did you get any emails for public input?
Yes, I have a couple emails I need to read into the record.
Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, Gabby Castellanos, did you read that one earlier?
I do not believe that I did.
Okay, she sent an email and she wants to make sure that all drops are charges are dropped against Aaliyah Lewis immediately. This felony charges blatantly encourage and rewards police brutality. And the next email is from Orlando Thomas, owner of Thomas Rentals. I am writing in support of the council utilizing CDBG funds to support small businesses. We own multiple properties in Southeast Urbana on Mitchell and Vaughter. COVID-19 has greatly impacted our residents' ability to pay rent due to layoff, business closings, and many have prioritized between basic needs such as food versus rent. We have maintained our full staff throughout the pandemic. Our property manager has assisted tenants applying for community resources, and our maintenance staff have worked to ensure tenants have air-conditioned and livable units. The impact of lost rent has been extremely detrimental to our financial stability. We have applied for all the programs designed to support small businesses, but have provided modifications, but are only temporary solution. We are working with tenants unable to pay due to loss of employment or other issue. but have no recourse for those unwilling to pay due to no eviction order. Our goal is to provide quality, affordable housing, but will not be able to maintain our standards and staff without proceeds from rent payments or additional assistance from programs designed to support small business. Orlando Thomas, owner. And a couple more. Andrea Hernandez, drop all charges on Aaliyah Lewis immediately.
Did you have any other ones?
Sophie Gadomski, drop all charges on Aaliyah Lewis immediately. One more. Thanks for the opportunity. This is from Josue Davis Cisneros. Thanks for the opportunity to submit my comments to you, and thank you for your service. I wanted to send an email because I have a longer set of comments that won't fit into the 3-minute limit that will be imposed at the meeting. Nevertheless, I want to enter this into the record and hope you will read it. I will also be giving some oral comments at the meeting tonight, June 1st. First, I want to say thank you for issuing this review of the CPRB and for continuing to discuss ways to increase accountability of police to the citizens of Urbana, as well as ways to deal with the fallout of the police abuse of an Urbana resident last month. I want to echo the demands of other folks who will be emailing you and speaking. We call for the city of Urbana, specifically Mayor Marlin, to press for all charges against Aaliyah Lewis to be dropped by the DA. We call for a truly meaningful and independent investigation, not the one-sided hostility done review by the Urbana PD, but an independent and careful review. We call for officers who beat Ms. Lewis to be put on leave pending the investigation. This is really important to restore the community trust in the police department and city leadership. We call for reform of the CPRB to make it a meaningful oversight and comply with its ordinance. It's this last point that I want to discuss in this email. As you can tell by the report issued by city staff, there are lots of problems with the CPRB. Their report focuses only on one set of problems, how the CPRB has been negligent in fulfilling its duty for years. The CPRB has not issued its yearly report for 5 years, as mandated by the city ordinance. The CPRB has not had regular quarterly meetings for years, also as mandated by the ordinance. The board has only received a handful of complaints, a testament of the lack of transparency, accountability, and faith in the system by the public. The Urbana Police Department has stopped forwarding citizen complaints to the CPRB in violations of the city ordinance. There is evidence that members of the city staff are also undermining the operation of the CPRB. All this not only documented in the city's own report, but also in other resources. Implementation of the city policy around citizen police review is obviously essential to the fair enforcement of laws and to the relationship between the police, the city government, and Urbana residents. You all know that, however, I also want to focus on serious shortcomings in the actual ordinance establishing the CPRB 19-20 of the city code. Even if the ordinance were enforced to the letter, it will still not ensure a fair and effective review process. Serious changes are needed to the ordinance, changes that only the city can make. The current civilian police board review ordinance does not conform to the best practices for civilian oversight of police as set out by the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. These aspects of the ordinance also just don't make sense and contribute to a broken process that needs to be fixed. Here are a few problems. Timeline on filing a complaint. Response to CPRB decisions. Lack of specific provision of ordinance for proactive review. I'm sure there are flaws to my analysis and the other will have more knowledge and experience to recommend better changes. But as you can see, there are major problems in our civilian police board review ordinance right now. They make the process of civilian review ineffective and untrustworthy to citizens. They hamper the goals of the review process. Only the city council can make the necessary changes to the ordinance to ensure its effectiveness. Only the city council can compel city staff, the members of the board, and the mayor to ensure that the review ordinance is properly enforced. I hope you will take the opportunity of this moment not only to protect the city and to deal with the fallout of public anger and frustration. I hope you will go beyond that and seize this moment to make proactive changes in city laws and governance that can ensure greater justice and accountability to the residents of Urbana. I have faith that the 7 of you will summon the moral courage to push for justice for Ms. Lewis and for changes that can ensure that these kinds of injustice don't happen in Urbana. Using your power to make the police more accountable to the citizens in the city is part of the change. Thanks for reading. Got one more.
Eric?
It's just a procedural thing. There's a, there were comments about how we just sat silently and listened to input. And that's actually our procedure. We don't get back and forth with members of the public, because if we did, we'd never do any other business. The way to enable a dialogue like that, such as was mentioned, is to do a study session on a particular topic, separate from a regular meeting. And then we can do that kind of dialogue. And certainly we can consider that on this topic or any other, but especially on this.
Yeah, I think it's imperative that we do so. Dr. Evelyn, I saw her hand come back up, so let's try to unmute her and see if she's there. Dr. Underwood, are you there? Dr. Underwood, are you hearing us? I'm not hearing anything from her. Oh, shoot. Dr. Underwood, if you can hear me, just remember you can always send your comment to citycouncil@urbanaillinois.us. All right. I don't see any others. Mary Alice?
I just wanted to make the motion that we continue this meeting to Wednesday at 7 p.m.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Well, I believe that's all we need. Again, before...
Can we take a vote on that just to be sure?
Okay. All of those in favor of the continuance, or I'm sorry, Bill, did we have some more discussion? I'm sorry.
He's muted.
Oh, hold on, Bill. You should be unmuted.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Did I have my hand up?
No, Colebrook did. Oh. He was waving at the camera. Bill Colebrook, did you have something
my
you wanted to?
My only comment is if you were going to do a voice vote, I couldn't unmute myself, so I was just waiting to get unmuted. So.
Oh, I guess we have everyone locked on the mutes.
Yeah, so we're good now.
Okay.
Except for Dennis.
Dennis. Hold on, Dennis.
Okay, now I'm back. Okay. Thank you. Jared, did you finish reading all the public comment, or if not, is there?
No, thanks, Bill, for saying that. Yeah, I guess we did get a couple of emails here right at the end about all the other emails. I just wanted to let everyone know, and I guess as part of the discussion of this motion for continuance, I read 30 emails earlier, which took me about an hour to do, and I, at last count, had 44 that I had not read. And I want everyone to understand that I am happy to read every single one of those tonight if it is possible to have them read. But people should understand that even if they haven't been physically read out loud, every single one of your comments will be entered into the public record that was sent via email. Every single one of them. None of them will be discarded. So
many of them are kind of repetitive as far as content goes too. So
yes,
that's fine, but to read every single one is
so
we might be able to do it at another time perhaps too.
And I would remind council that our council rules say we allow maximum of 2 hours of public input per meeting. And if you exclude council comments at the beginning, we've had over 2 hours of public input, and we will be starting with presentations when we pick up this meeting on Wednesday. But absolutely all the emails will be entered into the record.
Okay, council members, is there consensus? Everybody's unmuted. Sharice, I see you.
Okay, I just want to say, because we seem to be having problems with Dr. Underwood's stuff, Madam Mayor and Urbana City Council, Bishop King James Underwood and I, Reverend Dr. Evelyn Underwood, are continually concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to do a few more, you guys, or?
No, just on the public input, when we say it's going to be part of the public record, is there a way to incorporate it with the minutes as a separate document or something? We haven't been doing that, and especially for the ones that haven't been read, I think it would be important to do that. I mean, when we had the physical meetings, and if we had 100 people that wanted to do input, we would ask groups that were representing the similar ideas to appoint a spokesperson, but apparently that's not really very easy to do electronically, or we haven't figured it out yet. So we're having some rough issues with trying to get all the public input. And one of the reasons I think when we needed to allow the email input was some people didn't have the technical capability, they didn't have a microphone or consistent enough internet connection to participate via Zoom. So that was to allow those people to participate. But now that seems to be the more preferred method of submitting public input. So we get dozens of emails that need to be read. So I think we need to figure this out. If we're going to allow email input, we might just need to make it part of the written record and ask people to actually get on the Zoom meeting if they want to provide input during the meeting. But I feel like we could potentially be leaving some people out that only can use email. So I don't know. I don't have the solution. I'm just wondering I'm just thinking out loud. How do we handle this?
There's also
the way we handle this public input, we normally summarize what everyone is saying, and the rest of the emails that we have received are related to Ms. Aaliyah Lewis, so we can incorporate all those names and the topic, and then they will be put into the records. And the other ones that I read, they had to do with the CPRB, are already read, so we are done as far as that goes.
Bill, just to give in response to that, I mean, we saw the problem tonight where we maxed out 100 participants pretty quick, and if people were going to choose to participate that way, we could run into that issue again pretty quickly, especially with the volume of attention we're receiving right now. So
I think people also dropped off pretty quick when you mentioned that. I think some people that could do the live streaming could do that until if there's a big line for public input, they could come on later on, and after some people have had their chance to do their public input, they could go back to live streaming. But maybe it's just for a few weeks, but maybe it's going to be a constant thing. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Other thoughts, council members?
I'm told there's an option of a waiting room, which we could look into as well.
Okay, yeah. And I did want to mention to everyone who sent advice about the Zoom bombing that we'll definitely forward all of that information on to our tech folks and try to educate ourselves to be better prepared for the next time around. Well, we have a motion and a second. Again, to remind everyone, everyone's comments will be entered into the public record. I'd be again willing to read a few more if folks are willing to stick around for it. But I won't supersede everyone if folks feel like we've done enough.
Jared, I would like to say that if we do incorporate the emails as is, that we redact the email addresses if it's going to be published. It's a little unclear to me how it's going to be part of the public record, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I see. Well, it sounded like Wendy was saying that
Yes.
gets summarized, but I think in this case, we should definitely include all of the language in the emails we've received, and redacting email addresses would probably be appropriate as well if it's going to be in the public record so everyone's information is not out there.
There's two parts of that. So one is we're going to summarize the information into the minutes, but we also are going to redact the email addresses, and we're going to incorporate all the emails in a PDF document and add it on to the website for tonight's meeting.
All right. Thank you, Wendy.
That's good.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. I feel like it's important that we definitely have all of the words that people have offered to us tonight in their full entirety in the public record in some form or fashion. I again am asking thoughts on doing some more or calling it quits.
Since they're going to be part of the public record, and since Wendy also said that all of the key concepts have been already represented, I think that we can just include those in the public record for now.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so. It's 10:16. We would have to extend our meeting, pretty soon if we continue to have inputs.
Okay. And I do want to just publicly voice that I do think that because of the CPRB discussion and its pertinence next week to what we've discussed here today and what we will be talking about for weeks and months to come, that we, if there is additional input on that topic for folks who weren't expecting to not be able to talk about it tonight, that we allow them to do so at the next meeting.
Jared, I would remind people that those who have spoken tonight in public input, that is their public input for this meeting. So I know Scott Dossett hasn't spoken, but everyone who has provided an email or which was read into the record or did speak tonight, that's, they get one speaking opportunity at each meeting.
Okay. And again, just to remind folks, I think we're going to get pretty strong support on the council to have a special meeting called to address this item in its sole, we'll give it a sole attention at a meeting and have the opportunity to have real dialogue with folks. So we're not going to just go to the business as usual at the next one. So even if you're not able to speak at the next meeting, know that we're not letting this go, and we'll find as soon as possible a time to allow the public to come get together and continue this conversation and figure out what we're going to do. All right, Eric, did you want to say?
Since we're going to be dealing with this for a long time, maybe that special session would be a good use for the 5th Monday.
Oh.
Since we're meeting on June 1st, there will be a June 29th, which will be the 5th Monday.
Now that might be a little long away from how quickly we need to give attention to it, but
Well, actually, I want to remind the council that for the next few weeks, we're going to be focused on the budget It has to be passed in June. We also are looking at next week the capital improvement plan. There's a lot of, June is our heaviest month in terms of, and it's the end of our fiscal year. So the 5th Monday actually may not be that far away, considering the amount of business that we have to get done between now and then. And I'm not wanting to put people off. I'm just, there's just things we have to do this month, and we're still in a pandemic, which I remind people is affecting everything we can do.
Okay.
But yeah, the 5th Monday might be a good option for that. Plus, it will take, and I cannot commit yet whether staff will have the time to put the preparation in necessary for that meeting, because it's not just a matter of having a meeting. There's a lot of staff preparation involved. So I'll have to talk with staff about that.
It might be useful also for the public to suggest specific changes that they might want to see the CPRB evolve to that would be more useful than just sort of general discussion.
The discussion that I'm suggesting, Dennis, extends beyond just the CPRB itself. That's just one discussion. I'm suggesting a much larger discussion about how the city and the Urbana Police Department work in our community and its entirety of its function, not just the Civilian Police Review Board, though that does need to be addressed and maybe a function of that conversation as well.
Okay.
Diane, is there any, just as we're trying to play around with this idea and knowing that we have, staff is stretched and everything, I'm just thinking, even if we don't have a ability for yourself to attend or maybe a majority of staff, but at the very least to have council present to have a discussion or to receive presentations from the public, I feel like we should still try and find a way to do that as soon as possible. And I think waiting to the end of the month might be, it's too long in my opinion. But I'm trying to figure out a way to find a compromise between waiting a month and not.
Well, why don't we talk about that more offline? I really don't know yet. The other thing we'll have, if we do get the firm engaged for the independent review, that there could be dialogue between now and the end of the month, just through the firm's actions as well. So once we figure out what that's going to look like, that might help us. But okay. Let's talk about it. I just don't have enough information yet tonight.
Okay.
I just know we have a whole lot of city business we have to get done in the next month because it's our end of the year and we're late on the budget due to stuff related to the pandemic. So.
Well, I know, and I know it's hard pressed, but we've got to, people are upset. It's not going to matter if we want to do the budget.
Believe me, I understand, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
I want just public to know we're going to figure out a way to really engage in this. I mean, let's make it happen. All right. We won't continue. Just a reminder to folks, any and all emails in their full accounting will be entered into the public record that didn't get read. I got through about 33 or so earlier, and there were 44 that I had last counted that were in there. So all of them, all 77 of them will be PDF'd into, and any that were read physically will be part of the written minutes of the record. So just folks know. All right, we have a motion and seconds for continuance, and we're going to take a vote on that. All those in favor say aye.
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 Point of order, I think we need to take roll call votes now because of the new direction from the state.
I had, Diane, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I had information from the city attorney that they had not actually passed that yet into law, that he hadn't signed it into law. so we weren't doing full roll call votes on every vote yet.
That's correct.
Diane, is that your understanding? Oh, there's Jim.
My connection is breaking up. Can you repeat that, what you just said?
I said it was my understanding from our conversation earlier that Jim said the law had not been signed by the governor yet, and we weren't going to be doing roll call votes on every vote yet.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I see Jim nodding his head, so I don't think it hasn't been signed yet though, but we may have to deal with that shortly.
So
okay, it looked like there was consensus there. I didn't hear any no's, but all those opposed, same sign. All right, hearing none, we'll go forward with that continuance. This meeting will resume on this Wednesday, June 3rd at 7 p.m.